Chapter 1. The Edds stood, looking dumbfounded at the lane. Everything was quiet. It was so quiet that the only noise they could hear was ants crawling all over an ice cream cone. Through his dazed, beat-up head, Kevin heard Eddy whispering. The second he painfully sat up, the dorks were nowhere in sight. This was the last straw. They were really in it for this time. Ed burst into his room with such force he broke the whole door in. Eddy said that the scam would not put harm on anyone, but now look what happened. He tore apart his wall and shoved hundreds of sponges into his giant sack. He stuffed whatever he could into it. Before he left the room, the toast popped out of his toaster. There was no time to eat right now. The kids could be on his tail. Or worse, they could already have Ed and Eddy. Ed burst through his window, only to catch Sarah and Jimmy's attention, who are making a pretend pirate film. Sarah rolled her eyes at her brother's, as always, stupid antics, but she took notice how panicked he looked. Were those all his sponges he was setting free into the sky? Those were his delicacies. Ed scrambled down the neighborhood as Sarah and Jimmy looked at one another. The two children heard Rolf scream along with Kevin. Oh yeah, the Edds had done it this time. This one was no good either. His hands were so shaky that Ed could barely understand his own writings. As his belongings lay neatly all around his bed, in the corner of the room sat an upset sockhead who couldn't leave without leaving his parents a note. Ed started over again. He put the pen down. He couldn't form into words about what happened a few moments ago. Eddy forced him to build that thing. All he wanted to do was test it before the kids came. But Eddy, oh Eddy, why did he? Ed pulled himself out of his dark thoughts. He picked up the pen and continued to write. He was making it sound like as if he murdered someone, but then again, there was a possibility that they did. His parents didn't want a child who was murdered. They made it very clear when they moved here, after the incident that happened in his old school. Ed picked up the pen once more. Were his parents ever going to read this? Would they even notice that he was gone? It was like he didn't exist to them. What about time for family? This note was the worst of them all. Ed bawled into his knees at the horrendous consequences that were coming. Just then, his door was kicked off its latch. Oh no! Was it Double D? Ed screamed, grabbing him by the shirt. Eddy crammed anything he could into his one suitcase. He jumped up and down until he finally heard a click. The thing weighed as if it was an elephant. How could a bunch of clothes and magazines weigh so much? Luck wasn't with him, like it ever was, as the suitcase exploded its contents all over the room. How could this happen? He learned all he knew about scams from his older brother. What did he forget that was missing? None of his brother's scams turn out this way. He'd get the big bucks and never fail. But then again, the last one was the final strike with his parents. Was he under strikes too? Eddy broke out in sweat when someone began pounding on his door. He had to act fast. Eddy grabbed the vacuum cleaner. My little Eddy's not home right now, he said, trying to impersonate his mother's voice. Ed bulldozed into the room. Without looking where he was going, he tripped on the vacuum and landed on an almost hysterical Eddy. It wasn't my fault, I swear, Eddy screamed, before realizing it was only Ed. He resumed packing again, but had no idea what to stuff in it. What do we do, Eddy? What do we do? Ed yelled, with sweat flying across the room. Eddy ran around in circles, finally noticed someone missing. "What happened to Sockhead?" he yelled. "Did the kids already get him?" Ed pulled out a dazed Ed from his giant sock. He was covered in so much butter from all the garbage that was inside. "Here, hold this," Eddy yelled, throwing his suitcase into Ed's arms. This finally snapped Ed out of his daze. "We're fugitives, Eddy! Are you aware of the consequences we're about to endure? All because of our misguided temerity?" Before one of them could speak again, dark shadows moved along the window. They were coming. "Too late! Quick! My brother's room!" Eddy yelled, running into the hallway. It was the only room he could think of that nobody would know they'd be in there. He knew it was a good hiding place, since he hid there when he was in trouble with his parents. They never cared to look there because they liked to care that the room never existed. The Ed screeched to a halt when the front door was being pummeled. Eddy shoved his friends upstairs and they ran. They ran like they never ran before when the front door smashed against the wall. Ever so slowly, Eddy turned the knob and peeked inside the dark room. He hadn't been there for a year. Even then, it took guts to go in. This was where his brother took him in and tormented him, away from their parents because he could block off the sound. Was this right? "Eddy, do you think this is wise?" Ed asked him. "They'll never find us in here." It was the only shot for them to get out alive. He worked up his courage and ran into the room. His friends followed, and the doors were locked up from the outside world. Chapter 2. The three remained completely quiet. Ed squeezed both of his friends and backed into the corner of the room. "This is all your fault, Sockhead," Eddy whispered to Ed. Ed felt his face heat up. "My fault? Funny, isn't it? How it's always my fault when yet another of your amazing scams go awry." "Yeah, well, I didn't see you try to stop me," Eddy said, completely unaware of Ed's constant warnings. "You should have known it would go bad." "And boy, did it go bad," Ed chimed in. Their talking ceased upon hearing a creak in the hallway. They were going to be in here forever if they don't know what was happening. Eddy spotted glass on the refrigerator. He slid Ed toward the door and handed him the glass. He pressed it against the door and heard shuffling around the hallway. Rolf was muttering to himself while Kevin told everyone to be quiet. The only thing that Eddy could hear was his own heart pounding, not only from being in his brother's room, but what the kids may do to them if they were found. Ed started to look calmer when he heard Kevin say that they're not here. Just when they thought they were going to get away, both of them heard a crunching noise. Ed found a piece of buttered toast and was unaware of the noise it made. The glass slipped out of Ed's hands and landed in his puddle of sweat. In a matter of seconds, the door began rattling around as the kids finally found their victims. "We are not wired for this world!" Ed screamed, after realizing it was his piece of toast that caused them to get caught. Ed ran to the windows and opened them. Eddy ran in front of him, only to claw at the cement bricks. "What's with my brother and these stupid bricks?" Eddy exclaimed, not even noticing that he was walking into Ed. They tripped over the rug, which revealed a ventilation shaft. They were running out of time as Ed noticed the door coming loose from its hinges by the second. As Ed and Eddy struggled to open the ventilation shaft, Ed was thrown off the stuffed camel and slammed into the wall. "More bricks, Double D?" Eddy yelled when he tried to escape through the vent. His brother made it really hard for someone to escape his room. "Oh!" This way, guys! Ed yelled, grabbing the two of them. He put them face to face with a red alarm box. In case of movie break glass? Ed read. Bingo, Eddy said, smashing the glass in seconds. My bro is always prepared. What he pulled out was a lone peanut. His brother always did this. He made every plan have a flaw in it because he thought it was funny. His misery was his happiness. A fist smashed a hole through the door and poked in the tattered face of Kevin. End of the line, dorks! Eddy threw the peanut in which landed in Ed's mouth. It was just a scam! Double D! How could it go so wrong? Eddy yelled, so terrified that he accidentally latched around Ed in total fear. Eddy, the loss of probability can be a real mean. Ed got their attention when he bit down and broke the nutshell. It was a key. It must be for my brother's car, Eddy said, opening the passenger side door. Eddy, we're too young to drive. Ed soon ignored his own warning when a piece of the door planted to the ground. All three of them got into the car. Eddy was able to get the key through the ignition, but when he turned it, nothing happened. The car was working when he set it in the spot, but that was 8 years ago. Rolf smashed his head through the door, breaking the chains along with the impact. Rolf's vengeance will be slow and painful, like Papa's charcoal antidotes, Ed boys! The cul-de-sac kid smashed through the door. Ed found it a relief that none of them were dead, but they look horrendous. As Ed and Eddy cringed in fear, Ed had an idea and immediately took action. He smashed his feet through the floor of the car, like one of those Flintstone cartoons. Just when Kevin grabbed the mirror, Ed ran from the room and smashed through the wall of Eddy's house. Kevin, Rolf, and Johnny fell to the grass and took a moment to collect themselves. They were all already injured enough from the scam. They're getting away, guys! Nazz yelled, seeing the Eds begin to destroy the cul-de-sac as they tried to escape. Rolf let out an ear-piercing whistle, which Wilfred immediately came to. There is no escaping the son of a shepherd! Sarah and Jimmy peeked behind the house. They watched the Eds run past in the car. What happened to the kids? Rolf had the side of his body bitten off, and Nazz. Was she naked under that box? Yowzers! What do you think they did this time, Jimmy? Whatever it is, it must be worse than ever. The two youngsters followed in a distance so they wouldn't get hurt. The Eds were almost at the end of the cul-de-sac. It would be safer to get away from here. The kids looked hostile this time, and didn't look like they were fooling about killing them. I think I'm going to be sick, Ed yelled, gripping his seat. Not in my brother's car, you're not, Eddy yelled. Just then, Clank landed in front of the windshield. The boys screamed at seeing the creepy board's painted but faded smile stare deep into their souls. Let them have it, buddy! Johnny hollered with his head still trapped in a bear trap. Ed swerved the car until he leaped into the air. The car came crashing down on top of the sides of the lane. It just kept rolling along. Ed tried to catch his breath, beginning to hyperventilate. Were they actually going to skip town? Would his parents actually come home for once and see he wasn't there? They actually spent some of their time with him before working got into their way. So much undone, unsaid, he belted out. Mother and father will be so annoyed. Suddenly, Ed screamed in pain and began to slip out from the car. Rolf was falling underneath with his teeth sinking into Ed's leg. This would be his first kill. They got me, guys! I'm a goner! Save yourself! Ed whined. Eddy watched Ed's fingers slip one by one. Were the kids going to kill him? As he watched his last finger slip off, the memory of their first meeting came to his mind. See ya, Ed! In an instant, Ed and Eddy grabbed their friend with all their strength and pulled him out of the grip of a monocle-looking Rolf. Curse you, Ed Bull! Rolf smashed into a dumpster as the Eds were ricocheted into the forest of trees, smashing them into pieces until landing in the junkyard. Kevin was perched high above and watched the red car run past. He quietly made his way down and saw the other kids coming. He made gestures about what they were going to do. They agreed, and Kevin was off first. Before Eddy could glance at his rearview mirror, Kevin smashed against the car, rocking it off. Ed looked at Kevin, seeing that the boy was no longer there. The devil looked as if it had replaced him. He rammed the car a third time, making it somersault off of a pile of junk. Eddy gripped the wheel as he was thrown out of the window and was literally running along it. This chase was more insane than anyone thought of. As soon as Eddy was spun back inside, the car broke through the junkyard and spun out of control down the creek. Prepare for Rolf's water-leaded bladder! Frank's freaking out! Johnny screamed at the back of everyone. Double D, you got any great ideas? Eddy shouted. Ed was unable to answer the question as he was getting car-sick into a bag. His face took a pale coloring when he saw Kevin's head reach for the door handle. How do you like your faces? Fried or scrambled? The door was thrown open. Ed wasn't losing without a fight. He shut the door and Eddy rolled up the windows. It would hopefully keep them safer for just a little longer. Their hearts jumped at the sound of the thumps on top of the car. Wilfred's tail speared through the top. The head of the car was ripped off. Time for payback, Kevin yelled. Plague wants first crack of him. Rolf will use their hides as a crutch for Nana's going to. Like, thanks for the help up here, guys, Nazz said, upon nearly falling off the car. It wasn't me! Eddy did it! Ed yelled before his head disappeared into his shirt. In your dreams, Eddy backlashed. He struggled for a moment, knowing to himself that this whole thing was his fault. No, it wasn't. Nothing was ever his fault. It was Double D. Ed was left alone to face the kids as both of his friends hid. From the corner of his eye, he noticed the playground. Excuse me, he spoke, always being polite. I'll be right back. He grabbed the merry-go-round, which spun them all around. One by one, each kid let go of the car and went flying into different directions. The hood ripped off, only leaving Kevin. His devilish eyes almost reminded Eddy of his brother when the last scam took a turn to the worst. You dogs ain't seen the last of me! Kevin hollered when he was thrown off the car. Ed's fingers slowly slipped off one by one. Once they did, they catapulted through the sky, over the trees, until the kids could no longer see him. I can't believe it! I almost had them! Kevin screeched at the top of his lungs. Sarah and Jimmy watched from afar and listened to the older kids. Johnny slowly slipped away as Rolf ratted off and Nazz followed Kevin. The children were left alone as they all left to hunt down the Eds. Golly gosh, Sarah! They're gonna hunt down the Eds! What on earth did they do? I don't know, Jimmy, said Sarah. What were they going to do to Ed? Would it be worse than one of her poundings? Think of what they'll do to him, Sarah! It will be worse than soap in your eyes! Worse than polyester chaffing! Let's have a picnic and watch. Oh, yay, Sarah! I wouldn't miss this Ed thrashing for all the shoulder pads in the world. Both children agreed and walked off through the now destructed cul-de-sac. Chapter 3. The desert was interrupted from its complete silence when the wrecked-up car came crashing to the ground. Ed resumed being the motor and kept running, but slower, knowing that nobody was chasing from behind. Eddy looked over his shoulder. There was nothing chasing them. It looked like they were in some kind of desert. It was beyond him how they ended up here, but it was better than the cul-de-sac. "Ha! We lost them!" Eddy exclaimed to Ed's face. "How can you be so certain, Eddy?" Ed asked, trying to regain his composure. He was still on the verge of having a panic attack. "Those chumps will never catch us now," Eddy beamed, resting on his feet on what was left of the steering wheel. "From here on out, it's nothing but smooth sailing." The second Eddy said that, Ed banged into a huge rock. The car fell into pieces, and the three Eds collapsed into different places. Ed wiggled his way out of an exhaust pipe. Without a moment's hesitation, he ran over to the driver's side door where three familiar hairs were sticking out. Ed rolled Eddy up as if he were a window, and then collapsed to the ground. Eddy got up and took everything in. "Way to go, Lummox!" he yelled at Ed. "The only rock for miles, and you had to hit it!" Ed opened his eyes to find himself dangling far above the ground. The first smile of the day came to his face. "Seatbelts certainly are a trusted friend." His belt snapped, and Ed came crashing to the ground. Anger rose through Ed's stomach. This was the biggest mess Eddy got them into yet. He couldn't keep this rising outburst inside of him. "I've followed all the rules, lived a life of density and principle, so why didn't I follow my instincts? That one day these short-sighted suffocate shell games would go too far!" Ed burst out of the muffler and hid behind Eddy. "Double D's dark side makes my armpits sweat, Eddy." "What doesn't?" Eddy said, moving away from the smell. Ed realized that he needed to calm down. He couldn't show his friends that nightmare side that got him into trouble as a kid. "Lost souls we are, gentlemen! Doomed for eternity!" Ed collapsed to the ground. He felt as if he was going to pass out. Maybe this was all just a dream, a nightmare that began in his childhood. "Lighten up, sockhead. Hasn't Eddy always scared you, right?" Ed was going to go on about his answer until he was picked up by the hat. "Don't answer that." "Oh, oh!" Ed chanted, with his hand waving in the air as if he were in school. "If I partake in this chat, could we not join the circus? Eddy could be the world's—" Ed recoiled when Ed took Eddy aside and arranged his facial parts to make him look like the world's shortest elephant. "And you, Double D, can be the clown." Ed took a moment to ponder the idea. The kids would never find them if they spent the rest of their lives on the road. "I guess one could get used to the confining nature of tights." "Talk about stupid," Eddy said. He collected his friends in both hands and forced them to sit on the ground and sat between them as if they were lounging chairs. "If we're going anywhere, I know a place so out of the way, it's practically invisible." Ed grasped his forehead, preparing himself for an answer. "Dare I ask, and?" "Yeah, Eddy, and?" Ed chimed. Eddy collected them once more and placed his pals in his one-arm hugs. That always got someone to do, as he said, as he learned from his brother. "And if any of those losers find us there, they'll be mailed back to Peach Creek in a body cast." "Where are we going, Eddy?" Ed asked. My big brother's place! Eddy shouted with pure excitement. Ed's smile faded. He never met this famed, idolized brother of Eddy's. But something told him that he wasn't the best person. Eddy, I have no doubts that your brother would offer sanctuary. What? Are you kidding me? We're kinda connected. Like twins. Brainwave stuff. He's talking to me right now. Eddy opened his eyes to see that his friends were buying it. Ed was bouncing up and down with joy. He had his friends right where he wanted them. Come on! He's waiting for us, Eddy said, running off into the desert. Eddy's brother is so cool! Ed yelled, following along. That's what Ed always said. Eddy was glad that Ed didn't remember his brother. His brother was part of the reason why he had that cracked skull. It had been 8 years since his brother left. His parents ordered him out, but everything was so fuzzy to Eddy. He remembered how his brother wasn't the best person. Heck, everyone feared him. But that was years ago. He has to change in some way. All that pain was his way of saying he loved him. Ever since that previous summer, he'd been thinking about his brother a lot. His parents never told him where he was, but he was going to find him and prove them wrong. He'll make them live down the night they threw him out of the house. Wait for me, fellows! Ed called out from afar. Good. He had Ed to agree with this. Little did the boys know that Ed, in his OCD ways, stuck a label to a broken-down car. Chapter 4. Back in the cul-de-sac, the kids were preparing themselves to hunt down the Edds. Rolf stacked a bunch of his belongings on Wilfred as Sarah and Jimmy made their picnic lunch, and Johnny tried not to look noticeable throughout the neighborhood. Little did any of the kids know, Johnny had a secret melon fortress up in a tree. He was planning to hunt down the Edds and bring them down with melon power. He remembered when he played that shtick. All the kids enjoyed it and wouldn't stop talking about him. If he got there first, then all the kids would really appreciate them. Maybe his and Plank's loner days would come to an end. Kevin and Nazz were just going off on his bike when they heard someone yelling. Kevin ignored him and just kept biking. Nazz wondered how Johnny was ever going to get the Edds. None of them had a clue where they went. She put that thought aside and smiled at Kevin. He was too focused on the road to notice her. Late in the spring, they started going out. It turns out if she didn't act as smart as she was, he took a liking to her. The act was getting tiring, but these past months with Kevin had been the best. A fly smashed into her face. She kept her cool and just flicked it off, until even more flies started covering her face with their guts. Nature's so gross, Kev. These bugs are like freaking me out, she wailed in the most dramatic voice she could make. Get a grip, Nazz, Kevin shouted. This rage train isn't stopping until I thump these 3 twerps. Kevin turned his eyes back on the road, only to have a swarm of flies hit their faces. Their vision was blinded by bug guts. Kevin's bike steered out of control, making them crash into a peach shed. The 2 landed in a small field just outside of Peach Creek. Ow, that hurt, Nazz said as she cracked her back. Oh man, I'm so sorry. Nazz's heart fluttered. She loved when Kevin tried to make her feel better. Oh, I'm okay. Kevin ran toward her with his arms opened. Nazz did the same, ready to feel safe against his warm body. It was totally my fault. Nazz looked up. Kevin was particularly crying over his wrecked bike. He heaved it up and immediately began repairing it. Nazz's heart plunged into a fire for a second, but decided to keep her cool. It wasn't the first time he chose the bike over her. "Hello? Remember me?" she said, acting all sweet. Kevin looked up at the road in front of them. "Nazz, we need to figure out where those fool-ups took off. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be heading back to the cul-de-sac, not after what they did. That's the last thing they'd do. They're like such cowards." "Good one, Nazz," Kevin laughed. Nazz's cheeks grew hot. He liked her witty comments. He looked at her again with that endearing look. "Say, you got one of those hairpins?" "Totally," she said, with a little too much energy. "Cowards run and hide, right? Who's the one person in the world Eddy trusts, beside his two loser pals?" There was hardly anybody that Eddy could trust. Everyone was always mean to him, even if he didn't do anything. In a way, Nazz almost felt bad for him. Living in a world where he was hated every day had to be hard. "What about his brother?" she asked. "That little twerp wouldn't have the—" "That's it!" Kevin gasped. "They're going to Eddy's brother's place!" He gathered Nazz and hugged her against his warm body. "Nazz, you're awesome, babe!" Before Nazz could hug him back, Kevin threw her off of him. "Hold it! Eddy's brother will murder us if he finds out we're after his little brother!" Kevin fixed up the last of his bike in a blink of an eye. "We're wasting time! We gotta get those dorks before they get here! If they get here before we get there, they'll never get theirs!" "What?" "Forget it! We gotta go!" Kevin biked off, but his front wheel was dented, making it hard to bike like a normal one. Eddy would see the day his brother nearly hit him with his car. He was only 5 years old, riding his little bike. He just made out Eddy's brother's face. He would never forget that maniacal look in his eyes. That was the only time he saw him, because that was the night he left, along with his mother. His dad knew they'd be better off living in the suburbs, but his mom didn't. Kevin hated Eddy for ruining his life. He was going to give him the pounding of a lifetime. Chapter 5. The Edds were lucky they left the desert as soon as they got there, because Rolf hunted down the spot they were in a matter of an hour. Wilfred traveled along, carrying the heavy belongings and Rolf. Rolf eventually got down, and the pig watched his master throw a pitchfork around in the air. He never understood Rolf. There were times when he was generous or just plain crazy. His master snapped at him, all because he was hungry. He saw Rolf eat, no matter what happened a few minutes ago, so what was he complaining about? Wilfred gave Rolf a taste of his own medicine and pushed him into a wrecked car. Rolf ended his cursing upon noticing a label on the car. "Out of order," it read. Evidence. Rolf pulled his pig forward and waved the label in front of Wilfred's nose. "We'll have the Edd boys on a spit by nightfall." Revenge would soon be his. Meanwhile, the three boys walked through a meadow. They were calmer from the escapade after that morning. "Can your brother send me brainwaves too, Eddy?" Ed asked happily, frolicking through the grass. "If only you had a brain, Ed," Eddy retorted. "Come on, Eddy, have a heart." Ed really wanted to communicate with Eddy's brother. He wanted to know what was going wrong as an older brother. Sarah hated everything he did. He didn't want to have the feeling of worthlessness float over his head for the rest of his life. Ed lagged behind. "Courage, courage, Edward," he told himself. He felt so paranoid that they were being followed. What if their parents were back in the cul-de-sac right now? There was so much they had to explain. They caused so much destruction over the years that one neighbor had to move out. He later found out it was because they felt unsafe. Unsafe. Were they referring to his invention? Ed had been pondering that all summer. He was starting to think it wasn't true until the latest scan failure this morning. He'd been thinking about what happened in his elementary school a lot. He couldn't tell if it was a sign, if he needed to talk about it or not. Ed came out of his thoughts when he noticed a sign. Private property? Ed gasped. He looked ahead to see Ed and Eddy already walking through the land. Fellows? There was no getting them to come back. It was always useless. Ed took a deep breath. It was time he needed to take a step off the deep end. Slowly, he crossed the entrance. Nothing happened. He quickly shut the gate and ran after his friends. Wait! Stop! We're trespassing! Trespass, pass. It's a shortcut, Eddy said. Ed fell into the grass. His heart exploded with pure joy when he saw that the field was home to hundreds of cows. Look, guys! Moo-moo's there! Moo-moo's everywhere! My bro's got billion cows. A regular stampede of 'em, Eddy said. Yes, he knew that was a lie, but who would want to know what his brother really did to cows? Your brother's got moo-moos, Eddy? Ed asked, trailing along a group of flies. Ed finally caught up to the both of them. Haven't we poked and prodded Finn enough for one day, Eddy? I'm frightened, he said on the bridge, jumping out of his skin. Poor little old sockhead. You're so naive. I think you mean naive, Eddy. That too, Eddy laughed, walking ahead of his friends. My big bro would never let anything happen to me. And tell you what, I'll put in a good word for you two. Thank you, Eddy. Your brother certainly is a king, an upstanding and generous human being, Ed said to Eddy. Eddy's heart fell inside him. If only he were any of those things. It didn't even seem like he was a human being because of all the illegal things he did. But there were times when he was generous, giving him advice, passing down scams, and there was that night he wished him luck when he had to leave. Maybe somewhat of Ed said would be true. What's our statement time of arrival to your brother's sanctuary, Eddy? Ed asked. Beats me. I don't know where he lives. Ed stopped dead in his tracks, letting that statement settle into his brain. Pardon? Are you saying all this time you've been leading us to nowhere? Ed exclaimed, trying to make Eddy look into his eyes. Nope, I'm taking you to my bro's house, smart guy. You just have to figure out where he lives. Ed grasped his head, feeling his rage boil inside him. Was Eddy being serious? What person wouldn't know where their idolized sibling lived? It was really beyond Ed how long he stayed friends with Eddy. No, he wasn't going to think about those thoughts. He almost drifted them apart last year. He just had to take a deep breath and approach this conversation in the most patient way possible. The hills are alive, Eddy! Ed exclaimed, diving throughout the grassy lands. Yeah, with the sounds of an idiot, Eddy joked. Eddy bashed into Ed, who somehow ended up in front of them. Yep, he meant business. Hold it right there! We're not taking one more step until we deduce the whereabouts of your brother, Eddy. Eddy had to think of something. At this rate, it could take weeks to locate where his brother was. He had no idea if he lived in this state. Eddy wore that smug smile and leaned way too close to Ed. Forget to pay the brain bill? But Eddy, your brother's always been somewhat of an enigma. I've got nothing to go on. Before he could blink, Eddy ran through Ed's legs. Ed's face grew hot. Did Eddy have any idea what personal space meant? Better hurry up. Big bro's waiting. I'm so good, Eddy thought to himself. Ed leapt over Ed to take a hold of Eddy's foot. Do you think I could get your brother's autograph? Eddy took out his wallet and slipped a postcard out. On the backside read Mondo a Go-Go, whatever that was. Thank you. Give it back, Ed! My brother sent me that postcard, Eddy argued, attacking his friend to the ground. He got this 2 years ago, the last time he ever heard of his brother. Why did he stop writing? When he wrote it meant that he had to care about him in some way. An idea popped into Ed's head. He circled around his friend's roughhousing and took the card from Ed's hand. This could provide the very clue we need. Postmarks should lead us directly to... Drat! It's illegible! Ed said, seeing the smeared address. Eddy snatched the postcard back and blew any dust or germs that may cover it. You probably smudged it. Ed wasn't close to giving up yet. He spotted Ed coloring on a cow's udder, and another idea sprouted. May I borrow this, Ed? Thank you, Ed said, without waiting for a response. It didn't bother Ed. His drawing was already finished. He picked up the cow and showed his artwork to Eddy. Look, Eddy! A picture for Eddy's brother! Do you think he'll like it? Eddy stared at the drawing. Was that what he still looked like? It scared Ed how much he resembled them. A picture of his vile smile came to his head. He ignored Ed's question and went to find Ed, who was busy scribbling on leaves and placing them on a spiderweb. Eddy, I found the key communications we had with your brother, Ed explained. Among those, his some stink bomb recipes, his highness hot sauces, and my favorite, Marlis's misleading treasure maps, together with other contrarious callous cons, lead me to suspect your brother's quite a jokester. You better believe it. He's the king, baby, Eddy said as he thumped Ed's nose. Ed rolled his eyes and rubbed his nose. Yes, well, where could one groom this tendency to pranks and practical jokes? I got it! Ed threw his comic book into the web. Pranked and practical jokes at the Lemon Brook Gag Factory. That's quite a coincidence. Eddy took the magazine to grumble about the Lemon Brook football team, only to have Ed to take it back. Before another fight could start, Ed spoke up. That's it, Eddy. Your brother may very well work there. Or, at the very least, be a regular customer. I bet he's there right now. Oh boy, I forgot what we're doing, Ed yelled, hopping up and down. The Eds took off through the rest of the field. For some reason, Eddy couldn't get that picture of his brother out of his mind. Was he the type to actually get a job and stick with it? But what did he know? A lot can change in 8 years. Chapter 6. Sarah and Jimmy skipped down the lane with their picnic basket in hand, giggling to themselves. They hopped over the fence, heading away from the cul-de-sac. Their parents weren't home yet, so they were going against the rules. But what did Sarah care about? Ed was going to get blamed anyway. Sarah came to a halt. Jimmy stopped walking with her. What's the matter, Jimmy? Sarah asked. I'm not allowed to go in there, Sarah. I still have bad dreams. And my mom had to buy a mattress cover, Jimmy wailed. Sarah rolled her eyes. He was taking up all of her precious time. Ed could be getting massacred at this very moment. Okay, but you're really gonna miss a doozy. Jimmy stared off at Sarah. Usually, she always cared about his needs first. They just had to take a different pathway, and that was it. I hope Kevin knocks Eddy's teeth out, He ran after Sarah, only to run down the wrong pathway. Unbeknownst to Jimmy, this pathway leads to the trailer park. Jimmy looked around. Where was Sarah? His heart leaped. Oh no! Did he take? The little boy tripped over something and toppled into a pile of clothes. Oh, way to go, May! Jimmy peeked through the small hole in the pile of clothes. Oh no! He was at the Canker's home! How is he going to get away without being noticed? Get back to work, Snotface! Marie scrabbled at May. Huh, Snotface! Good one, Marie! Lee laughed. May grumbled to herself. Why was she always the one who was packed on? Jimmy's heart stopped when May reached into the pile of laundry. If you guys weren't such fashion hogs, there wouldn't be all this laundry to do. Oh, please, don't hurt me! Jimmy screamed when May was dangling him through the air. Looks like someone left something in their pocket. The Canker sisters swarm around the little boy, calling him by the name of Dutch. A little far from home, aren't you, Dutch? Lee said to him. The sisters tossed him all around, forcing him into a diaper, acting as if he were their boyfriend, or making him do laundry. Then he was having his body stretched out by the three who didn't want to share him. Tears filled Jimmy's eyes. This wasn't going to end well. Stop! I just want to see Ed and Eddy get clobbered! This made the sisters put Jimmy down. Lee leaned right into Jimmy's face, so close he could see her fillings in her teeth. What did you say about our boyfriends? None of your beeswax! It was Sarah. My hero, Jimmy said. It wasn't long before Sarah was pinned to the ground. She wasn't as strong as she thought. There was nobody else to help them. Lee moved her finger through her mouth and came out with a huge glob of spit. None of our beeswax, huh? Lee said, standing over her. She was taller than Sarah thought. Sarah struggled to get loose, but May and Marie wouldn't let her go. The gross mess went through her ear. She kicked her legs and was going to shout for Ed. Why was she going to shout for Ed? That brainless idiot wouldn't do anything. Well, he sure would, but he's not here. Even through all this torture, Sarah was not going to tell them anything. Stop! Enough! Jimmy screamed, unable to bear this torture anymore. The Eds did something really bad! Something big happened because everyone's angry, chasing after them and giving them their just desserts. Jimmy started crying, clinging to Sarah. She hugged him too. For the first time, she felt hopeless. These girls overpowered her in every way. Her mother told her that she can beat anyone, but she was wrong. She was weak to the Cankers. Did you hear what she said? May gasped. Ain't nobody beating up on my man but me, Marie growled. Lee looked at the kids and made the most haunting smile. Grab the 2 square girls. We're gonna need them. Chapter 7. As the day went on, nobody was even close to tracking down where the Edds were. Rolf was close behind them. If he was paying attention, Rolf would have seen Wilfred take off through the fields. Johnny and Plank waited for a bus to come. He wasn't looking forward to a vehicle to come, but he had to get his revenge. Nazz wanted to fix the broken wheel on Kevin's bike, since they only rode 3 miles from the spot they crashed into. She didn't even know if Kevin would let her lay a hand on the bike. The Edds, however, were in a field of tall sunflowers, which towered over them. Through his unique inventing skills, Ed created a device that would help locate the gag factory. Ed and Eddy ran into each other, but laughed it off. Eddy hit Ed in the face with a sunflower, which made him look like a lion. The two made a scene and ran around, pretending to be chased by the mighty Agamushin. Ed chuckled. They never had fun like this anymore. He knew he became a bore last summer, but he had to. He grew up too fast to show his parents how mature he could be. They noticed, but disproved his friends. They said he would be more respected by the other kids, which he already was. He just wished that things could go back to the beginning of last summer. What's that stupid thing? Eddy asked, taking Ed's invention. Can you see cartoons in it? Ed and Eddy played around with the device, much to Ed's worry. Eddy swiped it near Ed's head. He joked that his head was missing, and startled Eddy by having his hand come out and grab Eddy through the opening of his neck hole. Ed grabbed the device when his friends began roughhousing once more. Yes, well, it's all fun and games, but merrymaking nearly cost us this sextant. Ed and Eddy stopped. What? I missed that. What's it called? Eddy asked. It's called a sextant, an astronomical instrument used to... Ed and Eddy were giggling. Again, sorry. I missed that. What's it called? Ed smiled. They actually wanted to learn. It's commonly known as a sextant, Eddy. They burst into laughter. Ed thought for a few seconds and slammed a hand against his mouth once he realized the reason behind their laughter. Oh my! The two just kept on laughing. Oh, they were so immature. You won't be laughing when this unnamed device triangulates our position and give us the precise heading to the true direction of the gag factory. Wanna bet? Eddy asked, looking ahead of where Ed was going to walk into. But in order for me to calculate our bearings for the gag factory, I'll need... Ed smacked into the brick wall of a building. Land ho! Ed shouted. This is it! Eddy exclaimed, seeing the old Lemon Brook gag factory. He couldn't believe that they're actually here. Hey, big bro! It's me, Eddy! He began shouting as his words bounced off the building. Perhaps the front doors will yield a response, Ed pointed out. Good idea. I forgot. My big bro hates back doors, Eddy said, running towards the factory. Me too! We are so alike! Ed exclaimed. Yeah, right, Eddy said, screeching along the ground to turn the corner. Ed couldn't remember what his brother did to him. Of course, they were only 3 at this time, but Eddy still remembered as if they were yesterday. His brother hit him dead in the head when the rock scam went awry. Nobody cared to get his skull looked at closely. Eddy would never forget Ed's cries. Nobody ever explained to Ed why he was different. Eddy felt he needed to say something to Ed, but remembered what his brother said. A little childhood trauma builds character. He was right. Was he? The next thing Eddy found himself doing was using Ed as a battering ram to get inside. There was so much going on that he didn't even know what he was doing as he beat down the doors on poor Ed. Where is he? Do you see him? The factory was dark, but only light came through the windows. All the machines looked as if they'd been off for years. Cobwebs were everywhere, not a soul in sight. They looked all around, running into boxes or tripping into the walls. Bro! It's me! Eddy! Eddy sighed and took a deep breath. You know, pipsqueak? he said ever so lightly so his friends wouldn't hear him. There was nobody here. Where is everybody? Are you sure this is the gag factory? 'Cause I ain't laughing. Looks gaggy to me, Eddy, Ed said, rummaging through a bunch of gag toys. Ed, comic book, please, Ed said. He skipped to the beginning of the book. Man, that joke's old. Exactly, Ed agreed. This publication was printed out over 10 years ago. Eddy felt steam boiling within his body. He threw the comic across the room and fell to the floor. He just wanted everything to go back to the day his brother left, when instead of his parents ordering him out, he stayed. Then none of this would be happening. We're hooped. We'll never find my brother, Double D. Never say never, Eddy. Perhaps old customer receipts or employee records will unearth a clue to his whereabouts, Ed said, staring at the stairway. Choo-choo! Ed shoved a giant box into Eddy. It was filled with all kinds of strange gags. Oh, look! Boxes stuffed with stuff! Not again, Ed! We'll never make headway if you keep rummaging for... Ed was hit in the face with a rubber chicken. Chickens, Double D! Oh, I love them to death, I do! Can't have a party without a rubber chicken, Double D. Big Bro said so. Ed rolled his eyes. If he was the only one who was going to get serious, it's up to him. I'll go examine the factory's filling cabinets and see what I can find. What else you got in there, Lummox? Eddy asked, having Ed's words escape him. The two friends scourged through the pile of pranks. They hadn't done this for so long. Eddy had been too piled up in the scam world that he almost forgot about being a kid. He turned 13 a month ago, but still, he wanted to be a kid again. They weren't going back to the cul-de-sac anytime soon. All the more to catch up on the years he threw away. The boys' laughter echoed throughout the factory. Ed let out such a huge groan when he came out of the little office with no luck. Have you two forgotten why we're here? He looked over the railing. They were gone. Eddy? Ed? Hello? The factory was filled with laughter just a few seconds ago. Oh, for Pete's sake. If this is some kind of foolish joke you're playing, it's not funny. The place slowly became eerie. The place was bigger than he thought. It was quiet. So quiet that the silence was enough to make one go mad. Ed heard a sound. Oh, it was just his heart. Did it suddenly become darker all of a sudden? Or was this how it always was? Eddy? Ed? Ed called out once more. A piece of machinery rolled out and clattered to the floor up ahead. Ed slowly walked up to the gap of the machines. Is anyone there? A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Eddy, but with a meat cleaver sticking out from his head. Run, Double D! Save yourself! He yelled before collapsing to the floor. Eddy! Ed screamed, backing away. This can't be! Ed backed into something. If looks could kill, I'd be dead, Ed said in such a grave manner. Was that a fork sticking through his head? Ed screamed. There was a murderer in this factory. How could he not have taken safer precautions? Suddenly, Ed and Eddy started laughing. They both got up and waved their fingers in his face. It's a gag. See? Eddy laughed, removing the plastic cleaver. Would you fall off the back of the truck? Help me! Help me! I'm Double D! They were taunting him. Ed stared into space, having an angry Sith inside him. The nerve of them! Trying to fool him into thinking they were dead. The laughing. It was just like when they were laughing at him. And then he was laughing back at them while... No, that memory. Oh, we're sorry, Double D. Jelly bean? Ed asked, handing him a can. Ed mellowed down a bit. Why, thank you, Ed. These should provide quite comforting, and I am a little peckish. Little did Ed know that it was just another prank. The can exploded, with thousands of stuffed snakes shooting him out of the factory. A snake landed in someone's hand. Whoa! What's that? Nazz shrieked, acting ridiculously frightened. Kevin looked at the old factory in front of him. Chapter 8. Wilfred was munching away on some hot dogs after finally having peace from Rolf. What he didn't know was the trouble he was in for running away. Hello? Wilfred! The quietness was over. Wilfred peered through the bushes and saw his master whacking his shoe against his hand. Wilfred's eyes widened. That was it. He had taken enough beatings. Rolf was being too hard on the way he made him come all this way out here. The pig burst from the bushes. Before he could defend himself, the pig had pinned him to the ground. Stay back, or you'll meet Rolf's shoe! Mama! This is Rolf! The soul has ruptured! Wilfred! Stop! Release Rolf! Rolf fought back as best he could, but the instant he did, the pile of traveling equipment came crashing down on him. Wilfred set off once more as Rolf crawled out of the wreckage, but with a device stuck to his head. Wilfred! A befuddled Rolf asked. This thing must come! Whatever was on his head wouldn't come off, and the poor son of a shepherd was forced to wander the world in a sea of darkness. Ed was clinging for dear life over the edge of a waterfall, and by clinging, it meant that his hat was caught in the crack of a rock, and Ed was doing everything to keep it on. He was so tired of his friends taking advantage of him like this. Yes, he knew he was naive, but that didn't give them the right to fool around with him like that. This is why he was distancing himself last year. When he was with Ed and Eddy, he was something to laugh at by the other kids because of who he associated with as his friends. Now, he was starting to think they were right. Ed's heart began pounding when he felt his hand slipping. Assistance, please! Help! Where were they? At this point, he didn't care if one of the kids came along. Ed and Eddy were probably still laughing at the events that just happened. He noticed the forest of trees rumble around until he saw two figures horsing around emerge. They weren't paying attention. Ed made an aim and threw his shoe at Eddy. Maybe that would straighten out his brain. Get me down from here! He shouted. Hi, Double D! Ed called out. Hey, Sockhead! Can you see my bro's place from up here? Was he serious? That's the first thing he asks when he sees his friend dangling over a waterfall. No! Now get me down! He screamed. You heard him, Lumpy. Hit him with something. Something big. Eddy should have been more specific to Ed because he was shot into the air. Eddy flew into Ed, knocked his hat loose from the rock, and went falling down the waterfall, creating an immense splash. Hold! Ed shrieked. He looked up to see his friends emerge from the water, but hooked to one another, in the strangest way possible. "Fancy trick, Eddy! How did you learn to do that?" Ed asked when he saw the part of Eddy's lip was stuck in the gap of Ed's teeth. "How mortifying!" A smile grew on Eddy's face as he released his lip out of Ed's gap. "My big bro showed me." "Do tell." "Yep, my bro's a whiz at harpooning whales." "He is?" Ed spoke. "Your brother is a whaler?" "My mom's got 50 tons of blubber in the freezer as we speak," Eddy continued. The one thing his brother made him good at: lying. He knew he was taking this too far, but anything to make his brother seem like the most amazing person. "And he's got a peg leg too, but that's what you get for wrestling walruses." "Eddy, if your brother is a whaler, then he must reside by the sea," Ed said, sounding as if he was close to losing it. "How do we find it, Double D?" Ed asked. A smile grew on Ed's face. Even though they drove him insane, they were still interested in learning. "It's quite simple, Ed," he said, walking toward the stream. "You see, this stream is a vertical highway that will lead us straight to it. We merely need to float upon the current, and it will carry us to its opening and Eddy's brother's retreat." Eddy noticed he was twiddling his fingers, but changed into a smile when Ed turned and looked at him. Why did he have to be so smart? What if they did find his brother? Was he still going to be the same person he was from 8 years ago? He gave him his jar he used to scam people, knowing it would be in safe hands. He gave him advice, sent letters, and passed down scams. Eddy knew that they needed to find his brother. He had to find out if he really was that caring person and not the one who hurt him in his imagination. Chapter 9. The Cankers weren't anywhere near gentle to Sarah and Jimmy as they were forced to pull the wagon, filled with their belongings and sisters themselves. Sarah's energy was draining. She couldn't look back at Jimmy because they weren't allowed to rest. No matter how much Sarah kicked and screamed, the Cankers overpowered her. Why weren't her mother's words of advice working? Sarah faltered and fell. This was the first time she looked at Jimmy. The poor thing was dripping buckets of sweat, and he looks like he was going to pass out. "You've got to get up, Jimmy," Sarah pleaded, gently pushing his hair out of his eyes. "I'm not going to make it, Sarah," Jimmy whined. Before Sarah could speak again, Lee forced her back on her feet. "Quit your squawking and keep moving!" "You heard her! We got boyfriends to save!" Marie chimed. Sarah growled. What did they see in those 3 idiots? How could anyone date Ed? He wasn't anything special other than being brave and always coming to your aid when you needed him. Even if you showed him no respect, he dropped everything to do one task, and why was she thinking so much about Ed today? An idea sprouted in her head. "Gee, Lee, I love your toenail polish." "I said Lee looked at her toes. It wasn't every day they were complicated by the public. "Aw, isn't that adorable? The kid wants to be just like us." "Who doesn't?" May said, playing with her hair. "She's kind of homey if you ask me," Marie gripped. "Nobody's asking, Marie." Lee wore a kind smile and gave Sarah a bucket of red nail polish. "Knock yourself out, kid." "Golly gee willikers! Thanks, Lee," Sarah said, immediately smashing the paint can over Lee's hand, then her chin. Throughout the commotion, Sarah was able to drag Jimmy out from his saddle and was able to avoid the sisters pouncing on them. May was knocked off balance as the wagon sailed into a tree, pinning Lee and Marie. "Why, you little brats! Teach 'em a lesson, May!" Lee called out. May was chasing the kids in circles. Sarah was able to trick May by figuring the Edds were in a distance. Then they ran. They ran until they were finally safe in a field of sunflowers. "My chest is cramping, Sarah. Can we take a break?" "Where did they go?" May shouted. The second Sarah heard the sisters, she and Jimmy ran right under the leaves of the sunflowers. They were staring right down at their heads. They only prayed that they didn't look up. "Would you two quit thinking about yourselves?" Lee snapped, not able to take her sisters fighting any more. "And think about our boyfriends. They need us now more than ever, girls." A ladybug crawled along Jimmy. Sarah covered his mouth from making any noise. She was literally holding both herself and Jimmy up from the ground. An idea flashed through her mind, and she flicked the ladybug into the field of flowers. "Move it!" Lee shouted, hearing the noise. The instant they were gone, the two kids slid to the ground. They had to get themselves out of here, either home or where the kids were beating up the Edds, wherever either of those places were. This was the first time they left the cul-de-sac by themselves. Their parents would be so mad. But how could her mom get mad at her? It was Ed's fault, but then again, they did leave without permission. "I think they're gone, Jimmy," Sarah whispered quietly. "Let's get the heck out of here." Suddenly, they heard a noise. Was that snorting from one of the sisters? It was coming from behind the leaves. It may have been a trick, but Sarah just had to make sure. "Ew! It's a pig!" she said. "That's Rolf's piggy, Sarah!" Jimmy exclaimed. Wilfred came up and sniffed the little boy. He felt overjoyed to see him and not Rolf. "Hello, Wilfred," Jimmy said, giving him a pat. "Don't touch it." "Enough with the pig! Let's just go," Sarah said, trying to remind her friend about what they were doing. "He must smell the sweet aroma of my no-time nibble." Jimmy took out his candy apple. How long had that been in his pocket? It was like Ed, always keeping something in his pocket. It was cute how once he kept a lost duck in his pocket when they were little. The little duck ate everything in his pocket by the time they found its mom. Sarah came out of her daydream when she heard the Cankers' voices nearby. "Why does this place look familiar?" "That's 'cause we're walking around in a circle." Quickly, she took the candy apple, both gone on Wilfred, and dangled the treat in front of him. They got out of the sunflower field, going past an old factory into a forest. This is something she saw Ed do multiple times. The siblings would copy the others' actions, but this is stupid. She hoped he'd really get it for what they did. Chapter 10. Ed decided they would build a boat to go down the river. Since he didn't have the proper tools, he had to make those out whatever was around. It was going to be late in the day. If Eddy knew where they would be going, then maybe they'd be able to have a roof over their heads tonight. "Look, Double D! I finished the head!" Ed excitedly said. "That's very helpful, Ed. Unlike others who sit around and watch," Ed said with clear frustration. Eddy was sitting by a rock, shading himself with a leaf. "I told you what to build, didn't I? Now get back to work. My bro ain't getting younger." Ed noticed the exhausted sigh Ed let out. The only reason Ed and Eddy were still friends was because of Ed. Last year, the tension between them was so strong that he could have poured gravy on it if it were mashed potatoes. What would have happened if Sunday they decided not to be friends anymore? Ed and Eddy were like his family. They were also like his parents. If he didn't have friends like these, he didn't know what to do. Day after day, he was blamed for everything when it should be Sarah's fault. He needed to do everything to keep them together. He couldn't envision a life without them. His friendship with Ed ended for a day last year, and no, he couldn't think about that. His heart was still scarred from breaking in half. His project was done. Maybe that would make everyone feel better.
Eddy! It's a duck! See?
Ed exclaimed as he dragged his friend away from his spot. It was a duck! It had a body and a head. Steam built up within Eddy. Why did these things happen when his back was turned?
I thought you were making a boat.
And a boat it is, Eddy. It mimics the common mallard in order to offer minimal disruption to the local fauna, Ed said, proudly polishing up his own work.
It's got a sauna?
Eddy exclaimed. Ed rose up from his spot in the boat, only to catch himself in Ed's hat.
Saunas make me sweat. More?
Ed kept his cool. It was no big deal. His hat wasn't actually off. He pulled his hat, but didn't go as planned. His hat stayed on Ed as he fell to the ground. Thankfully, not to the whole cul-de-sac. It was worse for his friends to see.
My eyes! They're burning!
Eddy yelled in a melodramatic way.
You stop that! Does it hurt, Double D?
Ed asked.
Oh, hush!
Ed took his hat from his friend's head and sprayed it clean. In the past, they both threatened to reveal what he was hiding, forcing him to go along with the plan. He didn't want to think about that anymore. It only brought the terrible memory back in his childhood. Ed, drum roll, please, Ed began, as he proudly stood up on a rock, holding a bottle tied to a string. By the authority vested in me, sanctioned by what? I hereby christen the seaworthy vessel, the esteemed, SS Mutant Almost a Chicken Duck? Ed rode off the side of the boat. Surprised you didn't run out of paint, Eddy said to a chuckling Ed. Stand clear, gentlemen, Ed exclaimed, and swung the bottle forward. He waited for the sound of a smash, but everything was silent. He opened his eyes to see the bottle, swinging lightly from side to side. It didn't even make contact with the boat. Ed's cheeks grew hot when Eddy started laughing at him. Why did that happen? Was it because he was afraid he'd hurt a little bottle?
Hey, Muscles! Can we go now? My bro will make us eat a barnacle if we show up while he's watching Matlock.
Really? Ed asked as he was dropped into the boat.
He's gonna feed us, Eddy?
Ed asked. They hadn't eaten since this morning. Heck yeah! He was the royal cook for the King of Englishland. You mean England, Eddy. Ed was going to call him out on that, but he kept his mouth shut. He was catching on to Eddy's game. The boat drifted down the river. Eddy stood on top of the duck's head, looking ahead. Who knew if this could actually take them to his brother? They spent the whole day walking around in circles. But he had to be here.
It ain't nothing but smooth sailing straight to Big Bros, boys.
Eddy suddenly heard sniffling. He turned, and Ed had tears in his eyes. "What's with you?"
I'm never going to see Sarah again.
He smashed his face into his hands and began sobbing. "Why? It's not like she ever did anything nice to ya. Always getting you into trouble." Eddy turned away, and a sly smile came to his face.
My big bro always took the blame for me. That big lug.
This only caused Ed to get more upset. Was that another reason why Sarah didn't like him? There, Ed. Ed gave Ed's shoulder a pat. "I've always longed for a sibling. That way I wouldn't feel so lonely. Why, Mother and Father once—" Eddy blocked out Ed's blabbering. He was lucky not to have a sibling. He remembered how he loved whenever his brother was gone for the night. Everyone did. His mother always looked so scared when he was, and his dad always looked ready to pounce if he did do anything. All Eddy could think about is he wished he could be like Ed at this very moment. A part of him wished that he never had a brother, so they wouldn't be in this mess right now. Chapter 11. The factory door slowly opened, and came in Kevin and Nazz, along with his bike. Nazz had anger boiling inside herself. His bike would be fine outside. She wanted something to say badly, but she knew Kevin would come up with an idiotic reason. "Dude, what's with all these snake things?" Nazz asked. Kevin looked all around the empty place. Someone was definitely here by the looks of it. Who else would play with a bunch of joke toys? The dorks rolled around so much that it didn't even seem like they were trying to take life seriously. "Kevin, look!" Nazz called out, pointing to a light that was still in the office. Kevin was so happy he punched Nazz on the shoulder. "You are so on fire today, Nazz." What did that mean? Did Kevin dislike the way she turned herself into? Nazz, too, was annoyed by herself, but she thought it made her get her more attention, which is what she wanted, she thinks. Nazz followed Kevin up the stairs. He decided to kick the door down to make things more dramatic. He kicked it so hard, it actually turned into dust. It could have worked if they were here. This place was full of useless toys. Chattering teeth, whoopee cushions, and toy rats which Nazz was freaking out about. Kevin was actually tricked into thinking it was real and pushed Nazz out of harm's way. "What is this? A joke?" he asked. In a way, he almost missed seeing all these in his house. His mom liked to do magic tricks, sometimes playing a practical joke on his dad. When she left, she took everything with her. His dad wanted her to come back, but he also wanted her to come back to the cul-de-sac. She was a city girl. That's what she told her husband. Kevin just wanted everything to go back to normal when he saw his mother every day and not just once a month. "Hey, Kevin, check this out!" Nazz spoke up, rubbing the back of her head when she was hit with a filing cabinet. Kevin looked at the blue tag. "Dusty, Dusty, Dusty? I don't get it." "Sounds like something Double D would say." Nazz was amazed how Kevin didn't see it. She moved closer to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. He looked startled, as if he didn't know what she was doing. "Don't ya?" They heard a crackling noise. The wood holding the office together must have been old because it gave way under Nazz's feet. Nazz fell through the air. Before hitting the ground, she knocked into a big switch. The whole factory lit up. The machine started up, slowly, with so many squeaks. Cobwebs flew everywhere as the factory came out of its ghost town setting. Nazz, you okay? Kevin called down. Nazz sat up, rubbing her head. What's up with that? That was stupid of her to say, because this place was old. The wood was probably crawling with termites. Kevin emerged from the office and gripped the railing in fear. How sweet. Did he think she was really injured? My bike! He screamed. Nazz looked over her shoulder to see his bike being raised up in a paddle wheel. It would have been better to let it fall, but it was their only transportation. I got it! I think I can reach it, Kev! Nazz called, jumping up and down on the ground. She was suddenly lifted from the ground. The machine snagged her skirt. Hang on! Kevin shouted. I found that thing over there! Nazz yelled. She tried to get her shirt loose, but she was too far up from the ground. Then she was able to get a view of what was on the other side of the paddle wheel. There was a funnel with a deep, dark hole. Dude, what's taking you? Nazz shouted. Kevin couldn't even move the handle back from its original place. Wasn't he on the football team? He freaked out and sprinted over. I'm coming, babe! To her horror, Kevin wasn't talking to her. He grabbed his bike before he could disappear into the funnel. Hey! What are you doing? Nazz lost her grip and fell into Kevin. They went sliding into the deep, dark tunnel. Chapter 12. Johnny waited and waited for any sign of a bus to come. The second he was going to give up, he heard a noise. The doors opened. A man with big muscles and a cigar hanging from its mouth stared at Johnny with his demonic stare. He wanted to run away, but Plank reminded him that Captain Melonhead showed no fear. The boy climbed up the steps. He couldn't even reach the collection box. Plank told him to lift him up, and Quarters slid off the piece of wood. There were so many people on the bus. One man looked up from his newspaper, looking at Johnny dressed up in his melon costume. Good. There was a seat right up front. The less people there were the best. The bus jerked, and Johnny went tumbling down the aisle into someone's legs. Sorry, mister! They were all staring at him. Sweat dripped off his head. He hated when people do that. Everyone thought he was weird. Nobody in school would talk to him, and he'd hear them talk about him. These people are immense. All their faces were hidden by hats or magazines. Were they whispering about him? Buses sure do pack a wallop, huh, Plank? The hunk of wood wasn't in his hands. Where did he go? Did he wander off? Well, wander wasn't the right word because he didn't have any legs. Johnny walked through the sea of legs, calling out for his pal. Was it him, or was he getting smaller? Plank! Quit freaking me out! Johnny called out. He walked into someone, then walked back to another. He stepped on another's foot. More and more people were appearing out of nowhere. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Pardon me. Has anybody seen my pal? He shouted as he ran through the mazes of people's legs. They were all talking. How could people have so many conversations? They all kept staring at him. Johnny felt as if his heart was going to jump out of his skin. Where was Plank? In front of the bus? Door to outside? Anything? Johnny grasped a pole. He held it so tightly as if it were one of his parents. Why did he talk himself into this? He never left on his own. His parents and therapists worried about him if he ever went somewhere by himself. What did they say would happen? Oh, yeah, that his mind would go in. Something caught Johnny's eye. Plank? Is that you? The hunk of wood was driving the bus. The bus's horn honked. They were heading into the city. Johnny screamed as everything crowded around him until he had an insane look in his eyes. Fear not, Splinter. We will get out of this bus alive. We'll find the Edds even if we had to kill all these monsters. Johnny let out a maniacal laugh. Little did he know that he was going insane. All the people on the bus were cowering into the back. They were only trying to help until he started acting this way. That hunk of wood he called Plank lay on the side of the bus as the driver had no idea what to do. He just kept on driving as he was commanded to enter the city. Chapter 13. As if everyone's day couldn't get any worse, the Edd's duck boat crashed into a tree. Not only that, it crashed in the worst place ever. They were stuck in a swamp with murky waters, decomposing trees, and a woods area where many dangerous animals could be hiding. Where's your fauna now, Mr. Duck Boat? Eddy said, once again blaming everything on Ed. Ed wanted to backlash so badly. He wanted to call Eddy out on how he fought him over the steering lever. He snapped that he knew a shortcut. What shortcut? He had no idea where they were going. The collision was unavoidable, Eddy. It was the unpredictable current that proved unfavorable. This place was the worst. Although Ed didn't seem to mind. Eddy slapped a mosquito off his head. Unbelievable. All I know is we're stuck in a swamp in the middle of nowhere. Big Bro ain't gonna be impressed. Is that what you think? He said, who immediately started to grow annoyed. That I'm here to impress your brother? That I would forsake my home and family for something so trivial as butter toast? Ed shouted. They both heard a splash. Was he really swimming in that filthy water? Ed noticed how Eddy wanted to join Ed, and that was another reason why they crashed. Ed and Eddy were fooling around like they always did. Perhaps we should talk about you and Ed's immature behavior, Ed continued on. I'm sure he'd like to hear about the... Did he actually think his brother would care about his behavior? His brother had the behavior of a psychomaniac. Eddy almost wished his friends knew so they wouldn't be out here. Ed heard their bickering in the water. Crocodile attack! He yelled, attacking Eddy and fighting him in the murky water. The two boys played around as one of them tried to capture the other and ran out of sight into the dark forest. Ed stared, aghast of how immature his friends were acting. Wait! Where are you going? Ed quickly leapt from a lily pad to a log and to a rock. He wasn't going to touch that disgusting water. Who knew what kind of creatures were in it? A mountainous marsh is not a place to play, gentlemen! He finally reached solid ground, but a gigantic forest lay all around him. A deep forest with gigantic trees, roots hanging from its branches, the small things rotting. He felt as if all kinds of creatures were staring at him. Do you hear me? He called out again. Over here, sockhead! Eddy called out. Ed backed up, only to paralyze in fear. Ed and Eddy were disappearing beneath the earth. Eddy gripped the ground. trying to pull himself out, but to no avail. Eddy looked up at Ed with a look of fear in his eyes. "Make no sudden movements," Ed was finally able to speak.
"You're sinking in quicksand! Quicksand!"
Eddy screamed. He turned and grabbed Ed, who finally looked as if he understood the trouble they were in.
"Ed, we're done for! We are so immature! Stupid immature!"
Eddy gripped his friend, but unaware that he was causing Ed to sink further.
"Oh man, we're really sinking now! To all the girls I loved before!"
Ed yelled out before he completely disappeared under the mud.
"No, Ed!"
Eddy dug his hand into the mud and retrieved his friend by the eyebrow.
"Hang on, man! Double D!"
Ed wasted no time as he made a rope out of a tall patch of weeds. His friends were screaming for help. He went to glance at them, but he couldn't do that. He needed to focus on what he was trying to do. Their screams for help were the most important thing. "Stay calm, don't panic," he said to himself as bucket loads of sweat dripped off his head. The knots were secured.
"I've got it! Quickly! Take hold of it!"
The rope splashed in the mud. Ed and Eddy weren't there. The only noise there was in the silent woods was the sounds of bubbles popping on the surface of the mud. Ed didn't move, trying to comprehend the events that just happened. He was too late. No! He was all alone.
"No!
His best friends were dead.
No!"
Ed flew his arms into the mud, hysterically digging through it to see if they were still close enough to the surface for him to grab.
"Where are you?"
He screamed as he threw mud everywhere, even all over himself, trying to see if he could drain the whole pit.
"Eddy! Ed! Oh, don't you give up on me! Answer me!"
Ed slapped his hands in the mud in defeat. He had to stop before he threw himself in. Tears drenched his face. This wasn't real. This had to be a dream, but no. The dream would usually end with the laughter. Ed stared, horrified at what he let happen. He brought on their pain. He took too long to help them. No. To get them? No. To tell them not to wander off.
"Oh, why wouldn't you listen to me?"
Ed screamed, pounding at the mud.
"This is all my fault. I should have never let you leave the cul-de-sac."
He slumped his face into it and sobbed, finally letting the awful truth sink into his brain. He was the one who careened them out of the cul-de-sac when he grabbed the merry-go-round. He sobbed and sobbed. Although he was alone, he heard the laughter. He was a fool, a disgrace, useless. He was only something to laugh at. A tissue caught Ed's eye. "Thank you, Ed."
"Goodness, Ed! That's filthy!"
His teal eyes bulged. Ed and Eddy stood in front of him. They weren't in trouble. They weren't dead. They were just smiling.
"Gotcha!"
They burst into laughter, falling to their backs. They were laughing at him. Eddy stared into his blubbering friend's face.
"You're such a sap! This mud's only an ankle deep. Can't sink in it."
Ed stood up, only to stand right in the mud that was a few seconds ago. It was only an ankle deep. The world stopped as Ed gathered how much this was a ruthless prank by the two people he called by their name, his best friends.
"Got that right, Eddy,"
Ed chimed.
"Because sinks are Mother Nature's own cereal bowl."
Eddy just stared at Ed with a blank face. He never understood his friend's random sayings. He looked up to see the rope that was tied around Ed lay vacant in the mud. "Hey, Sockhead! Where are you going? You got somewhere to be or what?" Ed grew concerned. "Eddy, you said Double D would laugh." He's just being a baby." Ed wouldn't act this way. He knew something was wrong when he first saw the filthy boy wallowing in the mud. As they ran after him, he had an uneasy feeling. Ed stumbled through the murky waters and caught sight of the dark. With all his strength, he pulled himself up, only to slip and fall right on his face. This day wasn't getting any better as he slammed down a piece of blue tape that wrote "Caution." He walked down a road. He was dripping wet, filthy, and raged. "Hey, where are you going?" Eddy called out once he and Ed caught up to him. "You're heading back to the swamp. My bro doesn't live—" The instant Eddy put his hand on Ed's shoulder, it was smacked away. "Don't you dare touch me!" Eddy stepped away, seeing the enraged look in Ed's eyes. He couldn't keep his rage suppressed any longer. He came up at Eddy with full force, grabbing him by the shirt. "A sack? Well, excuse my sincerity for thinking I lost the only two people I have left in this world." His tirade wasn't going nowhere with Eddy. All he could do was stifle his laughter. "And it's surprising, because your stubborn and innate desire to shock, sandbag, and swindle is what put us here in the first place. You and your nefarious scams." Ed lost his confidence and backed behind a billboard. Ed's dark side always frightened him. This was all wrong. His anger was taking over his mind. He had to stop, knowing that he was going to take this too far. The smile vanished on Eddy's face. He was finally able to take his mind off the morning's events until Ed had to bring it back up. And did he really just insult his scams like his brother always did? Like you were picking daisies. You built the stupid thing, Eddy comforted, pushing Ed to the ground. Ed couldn't let his physical weakness let him lose. He had to be strong. He got up and reiterated. "If you had paid attention to what I said and not pushed the red button—" Ed emerged from his spot, only to witness the start of a brawl. "Stop! I demand you to tickle each other right now! Stay out of it, Ed!" Both boys yelled. What would Ed do? He was powerless. If he approached them, he may start fighting with them. Was his nightmare really coming true? "The evil dark side has consumed them both! Trouble, bad pain!" Eddy smashed on top of Ed and squeezed his neck. Why was Ed here? He barely had anything to do with what was going on. Eddy was once again leading him into trouble. "I've had enough!" The next thing Eddy knew, he was staring dazed at the sky. Ed kicked him off. This was the first time he ever showed his physical strength. Eddy was finally able to think straight again. That wasn't his brother who thought he was trying to strangle. "I'm returning home," Ed announced. "But we can't go home, Double D," Ed begged, scooting over on his knees. "I'd rather face my consequences, Ed, than wander aimlessly with a so-called friend." Eddy looked up just in time to see Ed walking away down the road. Tears crept into Eddy's eyes as Ed began to cry. "Say it ain't so!" Each of them knew that someday this would happen, but they didn't think now. "We are three no more, Eddy! Like hop, skip, and no jump, like up, but no away, like
blah, blah, without the other blah.
Eddy blocked out Ed's voice, feeling the tears drip from his eyes. He never thought that Ed would walk out on them, but this time he had a good reason to. It was his brother. He made him this way. He passed down scams, his sayings, everything into his head when he was only 5. By acting like his brother, he sent people away because they hated him. Everyone hated them. And now his best friend did too. The only one who was there the instant he got hurt and gave him advice that he never appreciated. This was all his. Eddy smashed his face to the ground, so angry to have Ed's annoying speech go through his head.
Fine! Go home!
Eddy screamed, bursting into the air.
I don't blame ya, because everything was my fault. Yeah, you heard me. A foul-up wannabe loser!
He continued, hitting himself over the head. He hated himself. He absolutely hated himself. Everyone in the world thought they'd be better off without him, and they were right. Eddy burst into tears. His cries echoed across the land. Ed stopped. Eddy was crying. He was crying because of him. Just as threatening to leave smashed the wall he was trying to crack for years. Eddy really did care about his friends. What was he doing? Was he actually going to walk all the way back to the cul-de-sac on his own? Eddy?
What?
Eddy was too upset to think why he heard Ed's voice. Was he trying to rub his leaving even more? You're sure, Eddy? Eddy turned around, revealing his tear-streaked face. My shirt? Are those salt deposits from your lamentation? The moment Eddy looked down at his shirt, Ed thumped his nose. Eddy stood, so confused as Ed approached him.
Gotcha!
They were quiet, staring at one another. Eddy smiled once again, having tears creep into his eyes. There was no need for words. Eddy was sorry for the prank, and Ed was sorry for walking away. They were suddenly swooped off their feet when Ed picked them up. He, too, had tears in his eyes.
We are friends once more, guys! To Eddy's big bros house!
Not that way, Ed, Ed said, stopping his friend from almost taking them to the direction he was about to go. This way. Eddy threw his arm around Ed, surprising him with a big one-arm hug. You heard my pal, Ed. Ed returned the hug as they continued on with their journey. None of them noticed the sun was setting. Night was coming upon them. What would you do without me, Eddy? Ed smiled. Don't milk it, Zockhead, Eddy said, unable to stand the sappy show of affection. The Eds learned something in that moment. They were never going to take advantage of their friendship like that again. There was nobody else in the world that they could depend on. What they had was real. In what was only a short amount of time, the Eds were closer than they were before. Chapter 14. What took almost the whole day, the tunnel that Kevin and Nazz fell into finally had an exit. Nazz was first to shoot out from its hole. She went flying through the air until she splashed into the murky water. They were in the swamp the Eds only left minutes ago. Kevin flew out next, only to accidentally bulldoze Nazz with his bike. That was it. The whole thing was getting ridiculous. Besides, the whole bike park they shouldn't be out here to begin with. None of them had a clue where the Eds were, or for that matter. Nazz struggled from the water to have a chill go through her spine. It was getting dark. None of them thought they'd be out here the whole day. Where were they? Kevin wasn't worried about this. The only thing he was worried about was if his bike was dirty or broken. Nazz approached him from behind.
"How's your bike?"
she snapped. He turned around in surprise to hear her voice.
"Oh, hey, Nazz,"
he said, with a stupid smile on his face. Nazz slapped him across the face.
"Ow! What was that for, man?"
Kevin asked, holding his face in pain.
"It's late, and I'm cold,"
Nazz gritted through her teeth. Kevin stared at her with surprise. She waited for him to do something, anything to see if he'd be the caring boyfriend she knew.
"Fine, I'll make the fire,"
Nazz said, fed up. She collected some sticks and threw them into a pile. Now how was she supposed to make a fire without a match? It was obviously simple. As her dad would have said to her, she had to rub sticks together to create friction, and therefore heat. She rubbed the sticks together, trying to get any sign of smoke to see if she is making any progress. Nazz slammed the sticks on a pile, finally having it. She always made herself look like a complete idiot, just for the attention of... A fire exploded up from the pile of wood. It did work. Nazz warmed up her hands and stared at the flames. She couldn't help but think about that camping trip she had with her father before the divorce. She was only 5 at that time, but it felt as if it were yesterday. No matter how many times her mother explained why her father was there, she didn't understand. She didn't tell anybody about her absent dad. She hated when people feel bad for her, so she created this act that she is the positive, peppy person who is happy. It was time to change herself.
"Wicked fire, Nazz!"
Nazz came out of her thoughts and eyed Kevin.
"Can I join you?"
She poked the fire, letting his words go through her head.
I got a peanut butter sandwich. I'll split it with you."
In a matter of seconds, Nazz marred down the sandwich. The rest of the sun set, and it was now nighttime. Nazz felt calmer in the dark. The redness of the sunset made her feel so angry. Her bitterness slowly drifted away as she felt Kevin's warm body move close to her.
"Sure, I could use another sandwich,"
he said, placing his hand on her shoulder. Nazz felt her heart flutter. He had that dreamy smile. Kevin knew what he was doing wrong and was trying to make it up for it.
"Yeah,
sorry about that, dude," Nazz said in her flirty voice.
Aw, don't sweat it, doll."
Doll? He hadn't called her that all day. Kevin put his arm around her shoulder, and she placed her head on his shoulder. This was the most safe she felt all day.
"Kev, sorry I slapped you,"
Nazz said, making her voice have a steady tone.
"It's been like such a crazy day today."
Kevin suddenly held his fingers to her lips. "Wait! Don't move!" He got up and walked away. Nazz giggled with glee. Was he going to give her something? Kevin came up from behind, but he was not alone.
"Almost left her out in the cold. Bad for the pain, you know."
This is where Nazz's heart burst into flames. She took the bike by its handles and chucked it across the swamp where it landed in a tree. Kevin was quick to react and ran through the murky waters to retrieve it.
"That's what I think of your stupid bike!"
Nazz screamed after him.
How could she let herself fall for his act?
She let herself act like a ditz when she said she was no longer going to act like that. Was it her? Was she something to be taken advantage of because Nazz was suddenly binded and hauled off her feet?
"Help!"
she screamed, knowing that it was probably useless. She was thrown onto solid ground where her limbs were tied together. Her handkerchief was pulled out from her eyes to her mouth.
"Out to beat our boyfriends, huh?"
Lee said right into her face.
We'll let your boyfriend panic around for a while until we capture him. Yeah, it's fun to watch a man wallow like Mom says,
May said.
You bet,
said Marie, distracted by herself in a handheld mirror. The mirror Marie was holding lay still in front of Nazz. She stared at her half-bald head that was either flayed or cut off. It didn't look bad. This was the first time she hadn't worn makeup for a while. She could actually see what her face really looked like. She heard Kevin calling out for her in the distance. Kevin was a better friend than a boyfriend. She just wanted to be in a relationship because that's what she thought she wanted. She didn't want to act like a brainless ditz just to gain someone's attention. What she wanted was to understand why the world had to be this way. She was going to change herself because it's about time she did. For now, she had to stay put in the wagon as the Cankers capture her through the night. Chapter 15. The stars were showing that night as lights turned out in people's homes to go to bed. It was a warm summer where you could sleep under the stars. That's what the Edds were doing when they found a secluded hilltop that looked over the city of Lemonbrook. Ed fell asleep in a blink of an eye while Eddy listened to the sound of labeling everything with his device. It was now a competition to see who could really sleep, not just the Edds, but all the cul-de-sac kids. For probably the 20th time that day, Sarah fell off Wilfred's slippery back. She didn't have the cleanest landing. She'd been drifting off so that she didn't even notice that they were in the middle of a swamp. Of course! That disgusting pig led us to a swamp. Why are we even on this filthy thing, Jimmy? Sarah asked. He's sniffing out the Edds, Sarah. They must have gone through here. How do you know? Look at that smashed boat against the tree. Only Ed would create a duck boat. Wilfred took a good whiff, and now he's on the trail. Sarah remained quiet as they got back on Wilfred. Jimmy looked hurt by her tone. As the months went by, she noticed how Jimmy would not go along with her schemes. He was right, but she didn't want to admit it. Her mother always told her that she was right and had the power over everyone. Her mother thought she was like that herself. Their father hated whenever she acted superior over him, which was every day. She didn't know why her parents married in the first place. They were going to divorce someday, but now. Not when Sarah was too young, and not with Ed and his disability. Ed had barely a clue what was going on. She wished she could be him because he had that smile on his face. She never knew how much she relied on him until now. He saved her life so many times. Of all times, he could have told Mom about her wrongdoings. Ed covered for her. Sarah rested her head against Jimmy's back, trying to see if he could read her thoughts. It was so late, the longest the two youngsters have ever stayed up. She began to close her eyes, until she fell into a mud pit. The pig rolled around, squealing. Sarah stood up, dripping head to toe in sticky mud. Oh, that idiot! Sarah! Wilfred can't help his ways of being a pig. He's not the pig. Ed, how could he make us come all the way here? I could be sleeping in my own bed right now. He doesn't care about my needs. He's just brainless. Sarah began to cry, not from how tired she was, but because of herself. Nobody wanted to tell her she was a bossy mama's girl because they were afraid of her. The three found a safe place to spend the night, but they couldn't help but feel so many eyes staring at them. If Ed was here, he'd let her cuddle against him. She picked her head up from the grass and decided to lay on Wilfred's body. Sarah was facing Jimmy, who was already asleep. Jimmy? The boy opened his weary eyes. I'm sorry. Jimmy smiled. He reached over and took her hand. For the rest of the night, they remained together, feeling the happiest they felt all day. Hours later, in the same swamp, Rolf stumbled around, still unable to see. He had no idea where he was by this point. He went from a field to what felt like a jungle of tall flowers. Now he was splashing in the water. He was glad his family wasn't here to see this. They'd just laugh at him. Rolf was the son of a shepherd, for Pete's sake. Nobody in his family was weakened by just some contraption blinding one's eye. Rolf felt unappreciated, no matter what he did. In the back of his mind, he knew he should have gone with Kevin and Nazz when he was offered the choice. Everyone in his family made their journeys alone. He wanted to run away, but that didn't help anything. His siblings all look up to him. He did run away. This is how it would turn out. Rolf backed into something. He was so scared that he actually punched a hole right through the object. His hand was stuck. Rolf crawled the ground, trying to get away. His arms stretched in the progress. It felt like dry land for sure. He hauled himself up, only to have his arm come swinging back toward him. "I'll get you, unsubordinate!" The stump smacked into Rolf, and he was smacked to the ground. His hand was free, but he was still blind. What was he walking on? Solid ground? It didn't feel like shifting grass or water or anything from the old country. It had to be a road to a horn blast in his ears. Rolf was thrown off his feet when something struck him. The device cracked open, allowing him to see. He was on the road, staring up at the starry night sky. He looked up to see someone staring at him. "Looks like we lucked out, girls." Before Rolf could act, the sisters had tied him up. He howled and fried until his mouth was gagged. Chapter 16. Eddy's eyes burst open. He wasn't awakened by Rolf's scream, but a nightmare. It was the day his parents threw his brother out of the house. There was something about that dream that was different. It felt more like a memory. Eddy was 5 when the disaster went awry. He had no idea what his brother built for his latest scam, but he said it was the one. His scam drew birds, making them go crazy. They were flying all over the place. Eddy hid under the slide since they were in the park. A car went spiraling out of control, hit an old man, and came careening into the playground. His brother's friend got knocked out. There were sirens. His brother grabbed Eddy the second he emerged from his hiding spot. His brother ran away from the scene when people were clearly telling him to stop. "What about Daniel?" Eddy remembered asking. "Mom and Dad don't care about him." Eddy blinked and tried to clear his mind by looking at the stars. The voices of his parents screaming came into his mind. Eddy was upstairs when he heard something shattering against the wall. His brother trudged up the stairs and barged into his room. Eddy slowly walked in, asking if he had to leave. His brother bent down and talked to him. He gave him his jar and said if he filled it to the top, he'll be back. And he left. That was 8 years ago. It wasn't right what they were doing. Eddy should have never brought his friends out here. Was that all his brother said to him? There was no way he meant what he said. Other than that, the occasional letters, he had no contact with his brother. He only saved him from the nightmare events because Mom and Dad would be mad. Eddy slid down from the rock he was perched on. There was no way he was going to get to sleep. He walked over to the jar of fireflies. Ed was still awake. "Eddy? I thought you were asleep." "I couldn't sleep." "Me too. I guess the excitement of the day had obstructed my mind." They were quiet, listening to Ed's snores. If only I could be Ed, I would love to fall asleep, Ed said, twiddling his feet. It's been quite a day, hasn't it? Yeah, very long. They ran the whole morning, walked the entire day, the nightmare of the scene that only happened a few hours ago. The fight was on their mind, but they couldn't have the heart to talk about it. Eddy stared at Ed's eye. He couldn't believe he punched his best friend in the eye. Sorry about your eye. Think nothing of it, Eddy, Ed said. Did he really mean that, or was he hiding how he felt? Eddy noticed that whatever it came to physical situations. I guess I was thinking of... Why? Kevin. But, Eddy, if you ever do something like that to me again, I'm leaving. Eddy took a deep breath, letting the image soak in once more. Why did you come back? Because of you, Eddy. I know it wasn't the best way to show you, but I saw how much you really needed me. That's why I came back. Eddy rolled his eyes. Ed didn't care. That's how Eddy always was when it came to emotions. I'm sorry for walking away. Don't be. I deserve that. Ed laughed. I know.
Promise you two will never fight again?
Ed said, scaring them both. Ed, we thought you were asleep.
I got lonely.
They noticed how disturbed Ed looked. At different times, they noticed him looking sad, trying to get in with their conversation. Don't fret anymore, Ed. Let's move on to that quarrel. I gotta say, Double D, that was a great defense, Eddy said, having Ed's words fly through his ears. Eddy, please, let's move past it. But how did you learn to kick a person off like that? That was so cool. Eddy, can we discuss this conversation? Ed yelled. Ed and Eddy jumped by his harsh tone. Ed took a deep breath and relaxed. He was on edge from tonight. The town they found comfort in was Lemonbrook, his old town. I'm sorry. I guess I was tired. How come you always get so defensive about violence? It's nothing.
Double D's got a secret, Eddy.
No, I don't, Ed. You're hiding just about everything, sockhead, Eddy said, emphasizing the term of his hat. Just spill the beans and tell us already. Ed groaned. Please let it be.
If you're not going to tell my secret, can I tell mine?
Ed asked. Ed and Eddy looked at Ed for a long moment. They never thought Ed had anything to hide. Sure, Ed.
Well, I've always feared that you two only hang out with me because my name is Ed.
Why, Ed? We would never. Why would you think of a stupid thing like that? Eddy didn't mean for it to sound that way. He was too perplexed by Ed's statement.
You two always leave me out for things. And since you have become closer, you hardly seem like you want me around.
Eddy went back and remembered how he took advantage of Ed during the school year. His disability had worsened a lot last year. He didn't think he'd fully understand what was going on, but he did. And they had been leaving out of things. Ed, we hang out with you because you're a one and kind human being, Ed said, scooting closer to him. Yeah, Lumpy, we'd be nothing without you. You're the glue that keeps us together. We could never live without you, but from now on, things are going to be different. Ed felt so relieved to have a confession off his chest. It was good to know that he had friends who cared. They were quiet once more. Ed nervously twiddled his fingers. I suppose it's time I confessed something to you fellows. He had Ed and Eddy's full attention. There was no turning back now. Before I moved to Peach Creek, I lived here in Lemonbrook. It wasn't much of a happy time. The kids here would constantly pick on me. They targeted me in gym class when we played dodgeball. After too many hits to the head, I decided what's when I give them a taste of their own medicine. And so, I built a machine that would swift the dodgeballs at them. The only thing is, I went mad. I set the machine on a warpath, hitting everyone in my class. I thought I had all the power until this classmate looked at me. I was going to hit her when I saw how scared she looked. That was when I looked around, seeing what I had done. They looked like they were dead, but they weren't. Suddenly, the machine backfired. A ball hit me, and I smacked into the wall, which is how Ed removed his hat and laid it in his lap. I achieved this scar. Ed and Eddy were silent. He looked up at them. They were looking at him, but not the scar. It was usually something to laugh about. But that's not the worst of it. Not only did they expel me, but they made me apologize to the whole school. I was only 4, and they forced me to do it. As I stood up there, they were all scared of me. I made my most sincere apology, but it wouldn't register to them. And then, to make matters worse, the principal removed my hat. My head only went through surgery days ago. They laughed. They forced me to walk through the crowd where they pointed at me, laughing and saying so much foul things. Tears crawled down Ed's cheeks. His friends still didn't say a word. And when I got into the car, Mother and Father wouldn't look at me. They've been ashamed ever since of a monster like me. Ed cried into his hands. That was the first time he ever talked about in 8 years. He could have talked about it during the misunderstanding at school in the fall, but so much was going on. Geez, Double D, that's quite a story, Eddy said. His heart was pounding. He never knew how awful his life had been. It really affected his mind. There, Double D. The sun has set many times now. Ed looked up with an interested look. You mean you're not mad? Why would we be mad? From what it sounds like, those kids deserve it. But I was a monster. I wasn't right, Eddy. Monsters are big and scary, Double D, Ed said. Heck, kids have no idea what they do. Sure, what you did was insane, but that school telling you to take off your hat? There had to be something wrong with them. Ed smiled so big, relieved to have that off his chest. The scar of his head didn't seem like it was something that was labeled anymore. You two are the best friends anybody could ever have. See, Double D? Now you've learned never to keep things bottled up. They jumble your thoughts, Eddy said. Why, Eddy, you say that as if you had the experience, Ed said, placing his hat on his head once more. Eddy is next to tell a secret! Eddy grew nervous. Now was the right time. He had to warn them about his past and his brother. But they were really out here. Where were they supposed to go once morning came? What would they think of him with all those made-up stories? Ed and Eddy had been on the rocks with him since last summer. He'd been leading them on with so many false personalities. The dream he had was nothing. His brother was fuzzy because he was too young to understand, right? Well, do you know that I almost drowned once? We were river rafting, Bro and I fell out. There was this octopus who scooped me up. My bro defeated him.
Oh! Don't stop there, Eddy! Keep going! Ed said. Why don't you ask him when we find him tomorrow? You don't want to have bad dreams now, do ya? Although everything was better between the friends, a nightmare haunted them through the night. Chapter 17. The night went by and the sun came up. As soon as the sun hit Sarah and Jimmy's faces, they were off of Wilfred. They need to make sure they wouldn't run into the Cankers. They weren't sure where they run into them, considering they had no idea where the Edds were. Wilfred seemed to be on the right track, though. Darn it! Sarah groaned in pain, after falling off of Wilfred for like the 30th time. Sarah? Are you okay? Jimmy asked, only to have him fall off of Wilfred instead. We fell off that stupid slippery pig all the way over here, Jimmy. Wilfred can't help his oily complexion, Sarah. They were unsure where they are. They left the swamp and now they're in town, but they had no idea where the Edds are going. Suddenly, Wilfred squealed and galloped down the road. Oh! I think he wants us to follow him! Hurry! Jimmy called out. Sarah grumbled to herself, and the two kids followed Wilfred down the road. The next to emerge from the swamp was Kevin, who dragged his bike alongside him. He didn't catch a wink last night. He looked everywhere for Nazz. He almost got attacked by a bear because he mistook its eyes for Nazz. Kevin stopped and slumped against his bike. Oh, what's the use? Probably getting back at me. For what? I don't know. In the back of his mind, Kevin had an inkling about why she was so mad at him. He did save his bike over her in the gag factory. Kevin's mother gave him this bike the day she left. She was meaning for it to be a gift when they move into the city, but his dad won't allow that to happen. He wasn't the one to see him nearly got hit by Eddy's car. His mother saw him a few times, where she saw him doing illegal things. He acted as if the bike were his mom. Strange, but he wanted her back in his life. So did his dad, but his job was close to home than the city. Kevin thought back to Nazz. That was their first connection. When they met in kindergarten, Kevin was sad about his mother's leaving. Nazz sat down with him and said she knew how he felt. From that day on, they remained close friends and promised to be there for one another. He couldn't relate to anybody else like Nazz, except maybe Eddy? Kevin spied through the ring of his bike to catch a familiar figure scurrying away. Eddy! Kevin screamed, launching himself on his bike and going full speed after his enemy. Time's up, Dorgo! Little did he know that he was falling into a trap. It turned out to be Marie Canker, disguised as Eddy. Kevin banged into May and was held up from the ground by his foot. So much for your ride, huh, tough guy? Lee said to him. That was the last thing Kevin heard before he was being bound and gagged. Ed's nose twitched as he came out of his slumber. What was that smell? It smelled like body odor and cheap cologne. Ed's eyes burst open. He was sleeping on Eddy, and Ed was leaning against his head. Was that Ed's? Good Lord! Ed screamed, scrambling out of their dog pile. They must have gotten like that when they were sleeping. Icky, yucky, foul! Ed slapped his head. What was he freaking out over? They used to pile each other all the time when they were roughhousing. Why did they give that up? Oh, who am I kidding? I just slept in my clothes. Ed released the fireflies into the daylight when he heard grunting. Ed had fallen on Eddy when Ed broke out of the pile. "Get off!" Eddy shouted, kicking Ed far up into the sky. He stood up and cracked his back. That was the worst sleep he had in years. He barely ever slept when his brother was at home. He'd always played loud rock music or tried to scare him. "We should have slept at that motel," he said. They were close to the town now. They still had no idea where they were going, but at least they're near civilization. Suddenly, Ed came flying back down and smashed into the ground. The ground rumbled around as if they were in an earthquake. The pile of rocks around them filled into the air and collapsed near the two boys. "Yup, belly's empty," said Ed. "Breakfast double D?" "I'm afraid we don't have any food, Ed." Ed's eyes bulged out from his sockets. He was set into a panic. "Food for Ed! Eat now! I'm hungry! Eddy, Billy's sad!" Ed exclaimed, pulling out a few of Eddy's hairs. "Breakfast for Ed, Eddy!" "Breakfast? I'm in," Eddy called out. Ed and Eddy ran. Ed once again brought up the rear, but he wasn't going to let them leave his sight this time. Ed screeched to a halt, or rather, in the air. "Stop!" Ed screamed, reaching out and grabbing Eddy's legs, who grabbed Ed's in the progress. The Eds went falling through the air. They braced themselves for impact, but their landing wasn't what they expected to be. Chapter 18. The Eds had a cushioning landing, a big change. Ed looked around to see the cliff they were perched on was only a few feet away. They were high above the ground with what looked like a bunch of carnival rides below them. "What happened?" "We seem to be on a Ferris wheel," Ed pointed out. "Too high, guys!" Ed immediately started panicking. "Ed, stay calm. No sudden movements now," Ed said to his friend. Ed's words went through Ed's ears as he leapt from their seat to the next until the Ferris wheel began moving. Ed was trying to run to the ground, but he wasn't going anywhere. He made the Ferris wheel go spinning out of control until the Eds went flying through the air. They smacked into a sign, which came collapsing to the ground. "Oh, now look what we've done!" Ed cried, grasping his head after he dragged himself out of the sign. "When will this state of malfunction and mishap end?" Ed looked closely at the sign. "Mondo a Go-Go," it read. "I'm really starting to hate slapstick," Eddy announced, noticing how his life was starting to become his theme. "Breakfast, guys! Finders keepers!" Ed exclaimed happily, eating a corn dog that was on the ground for who knows how long. "Glutton," Eddy said to him before turning to Ed. He was really focused on that sign. "Mondo a Go-Go. Now why does that sound familiar?" "It doesn't. Ed, find me one of those corn dogs, will ya? I could eat a horse." Eddy was cut off when he noticed Ed rummaging his hand through his pocket. He snagged his wallet back when Ed took something out from it. "Hey! Get your mitts off my wallet!" "Eddy! Look!" Ed exclaimed, holding the backside of Eddy's postcard. It was the same lettering and design. "See how the billboard and the postcard your brother sent to you match? He must have sent this from this amusement park." "It does? He did?" Light grew into Eddy's eyes. "We're here!" Without thinking, Eddy grabbed his friends and started running around the park. The Eds split up and looked around. There were so many places he could be, if he really was here. "Bro! Keep looking, keep looking! He's gotta be around here somewhere," Eddy said, bouncing all over the place. he stopped in place. Eddy turned to see Ed, who was standing in place, looking as if he were in a trance. "Hey! Why don't you quit standing there and do something? Whoa!" Ed bellowed. The Eds froze in place. An actual house shaped like a whale stood in front of them. "Eddy, didn't you say your brother was once a whaler?" Ed asked. "That's his place! That's got to be his house!" As Ed and Ed scrambled around, excited to meet his brother, Eddy almost felt sick to his stomach. This may actually be his brother's place. It was like him to reside in strange places. Eddy's legs started to walk toward the place, but his mind was telling him to run. It was his conscience once again getting in the way. It had been doing that this whole journey. Eddy shut it up and walked to the steps. He held up his fist, going to knock on the door. "Super sweet! Our problems are over, boys!" Eddy was stopped from knocking on the door, not by his conscience, but by someone they never expected to see. "Your queens in shining armors have arrived!" "May? Lee? Marie?" Ed cried in fear. How on earth did they get here? Had they been following them this whole time? "We got your back, cutie pie!" Marie capsized the wagon and spilled Kevin, Rolf, and Nazz, who were tied up. "Double the Ed boy?" Rolf announced upon noticing Ed. "It's the dorks!" "What are they doing here? What are you doing here?" Eddy asked, trying to wrap his head around the questions. The Cankers weren't even a part of the horrible scam that went awry. It was bizarre seeing the Cankers since they hadn't seen them since last summer. They were very different from terrorizing girls they knew last summer. "Taking care of our boyfriends? They were chasing you to beat you up," May said to Ed, who was trying to get away. "Yeah, no one beats up our little love muffins," Marie said, pinning Ed against the house. Ed began to sweat profusely. That always happens when he's around Marie. He caught a patch of dry mouth. Before they can answer, they were all taken aback by a familiar squeal. "Wilfred! Is that you?" Rolf asked, sitting up. He thought he lost his pig for good. "I swear, if he eats one more corn dog off the ground, look! It's those twerps!" Marie gasped, with the angry fire in her eyes. The two children were going to pay for humiliating them. "Baby sister!" Ed rejoiced. He thought he was never going to see her again. "Jeepers, Ed! You're still in one piece!" Sarah said to him. One side of her was relieved that they found Ed. He'd kept her safe from the Cankers. "Did we miss the Ed's beating?" Jimmy asked, hoping that they didn't come all this way for nothing. Kevin freed one of his arms and grabbed Eddy by the leg. "Nope, you're just in time." "No, wait!" Eddy flailed until a realization flew into his mind. "In your dreams, double chin. Tell you what, why don't you talk to my bro? He lives here, you know," Eddy said, presenting the whale house in front of them. This statement caused an uproar of different reactions. Kevin noticed how Nazz was immediately love-struck. She had always had a crush on Eddy's brother. Why? It was beyond him. Everyone waited in anticipation as they climbed up the stairs. This was it. There was no turning back now. He was going to find out the truth he needed to know about his brother. Chapter 19. Eddy knocked on the door. There was a long period of silence until the door opened. A dark figure could be seen through the chain-locked door. "Park don't open until noon," the voice said upon seeing the Ed standing at his doorstep. Eddy recognized that smooth, husky voice in a heartbeat. "I told you he's a whiz at telling time!" Eddy exclaimed to Ed. "Pipsqueak?" the figure asked when he realized who the boy in the yellow shirt was. "Bro!" Eddy greeted, jumping into the air. "Do Mom and Dad know you're here?" he asked. "As if." There was silence. "Anyone know you're here?" He was really empathized on the anyone part. Who else was he referring to? "Only these chumps who chased us here," Eddy said through the door. The door was unlatched. "Just a sec." And he emerged from the shadows. Eddy felt his heart explode. Here he was. He looked taller, but he still looked just like him. That's the one thing that was never going to change. How old was he now? He must be in his 20s. Adults always had sense. "Aren't those ankle biters from the cul-de-sac?" he asked. Eddy went up and wrapped himself around the legs. "Yeah, and they said they want to beat me up, all for nothing." His brother turned and looked at the kids. Eddy snickered when Kevin looked as if he was going to wet his pants. He even tried to hide behind Rolf. "All for nothing, huh?" his brother said, looking imitating as he removed his sunglasses. The next thing Eddy knew was he was being scooped off his feet. "Still the troublemaking Eddy, I see." Eddy laughed, but he moved his brother's hand away. It felt strange that his brother was being so kind to him. "Stop it, bro! I smell fingers after I eat cheese," Ed said in his usual dumb voice. Eddy glanced at his brother. Did he remember Ed? The memory of how he hurt Ed came to his mind, but Eddy forced it away. I told the guys you'd hook us up," Eddy said with a nervous smile. "Ed? And Double D." Ed nervously approached the man with his hand out. "I think it's very, Ed fainted from all the excitement. Eddy winced, but he heard his brother laughing. This was funny? Yes, of course it was. He couldn't show his brother that he turned into a worrywart. Subtly, Eddy bonked off the stairs. His brother dropped him. Was that by accident? It could have been that time where he tripped him on the staircase. His brother bent down to him and whispered rather loudly, "Why's your girlfriend wearing a sock on her head?" Eddy blinked. Girlfriend? Was he blind? And his brother was really going to go there? Since last summer, he'd been questioning about his sexuality. At one point, he felt attracted to Nazz, but then a few months later, he didn't anymore. He felt these strange feelings toward Ed. Eddy was trying to ignore it because he didn't know what his brother would think about that. His brother slowly scooped him up and balanced him on one foot. "Sure, I'll help you out." Eddy's jaw dropped. "Really?" he exclaimed with every amount of excitement. He leaped and embraced his brother. He really has changed. After all that time of wanting to turn back, he was only being a baby. "What would I do without you? You're my hero!" "Happy place, Double D! Happy place!" Ed yelled happily, running around in circles. Kevin had steam boil within himself as the Edds partied to themselves. The Edds got lucky this time. "Isn't it touching, Sarah? It's like a fairy tale come true," Jimmy said to Sarah. Sarah stuck her tongue out in disgust. "Eddy and his two stooges got away with their lives, man. We got burned again," Kevin said as the kids untied one another. The next thing the kids knew, they were witnessing something horrific. "Bro, don't!"
Eddy begged the instant he recognized the look in his brother's eyes. His brother was holding him above the ground by his lip. Just for old time's sake, let's play uncle. His brother spun him on his back. "Want to crash at my place, don't ya?" "That's why we came all this way." A sheer amount of pain went through Eddy's leg. His brother twisted his little brother's leg in an angle it wasn't supposed to go in. "Oh my!" Ed gasped under his breath. He noticed Ed was smiling at the scene when his brother let go of Eddy and went spinning around like a wind-up toy. Eddy's brother laughed out his horrendous laugh. Was this how all siblings act? Eddy was roughly grabbed from the back of his pants. "That was good, Pipsqueak." Eddy was placed right into his hand. He felt so high from the ground. Was he always this tall? He grew nervous. Everyone was staring at him in a questionable way. He had to be just playing with them. Yeah. All those times he was hurting him was his way of playing. "So, can we go inside now?" Eddy asked. "Why not? Don't forget to wipe your feet." Eddy was thrown against his brother's house. Not just once, but twice, and then a third time, and so on. Ed's smile disappeared from his face. This didn't look as if his brother was playing around for fun anymore. Eddy looked as if he was getting really hurt. "Dude, Eddy's brother is a real jerk," Nazz said, shocked at what she was seeing. Kevin hid behind Nazz. He heard the vile things that he did, but he didn't know that he tormented Eddy too. "What's he doing to my man?" Lee screamed. She charged at him, but her sisters kept her back. Who knew what that man could do to her? The final time Eddy was thrown against the house, it tipped off its feet. Eddy grabbed hold of his brother's arm. That's all he could do, along with smiling. "Bro, give it up!" Eddy yelled. "Give it up? I thought you wanted to hang out with your hero." He shoved his face right into Eddy's. Eddy's heart burst with fear when he smelled alcohol on his breath. "I do, bro! I do! Mr. Eddy's brother!" Ed spoke up. Eddy turned and gave Ed a fearful look. He didn't want him to get into this. As the older sibling, don't you think you should be setting an example for Ed and not, Eddy's brother stared at him in the most menacing way possible. Ed couldn't back down. He told himself in the swamp he needed to be strong. Belittle him in front of his friends? Belittle? He's always been little, he scoffed. "I like you, girlfriend," he continued on with that insulting act. Before anyone could react, he used Eddy as if he were a hammer and hit Ed deep into the ground. "You got spunk." "Don't!" both Marie and Ed yelled. "What the heck? Somebody do something!" Jimmy yelled out. Rolf puffed up his chest. "Rolf has had enough of your flapdoodle, Elder One! Prepare yourself for a merciless thrashing!" He threw Kevin into the picture. Kevin looked back, wanting to run away. Eddy's brother threw Eddy against his house once more, but this time, Eddy grabbed hold of the door, stretching his arms out in the progress. All these years, Kevin blamed Eddy for his mother's leaving. He had nothing to do with it. It's his brother he should be angry with. For the first time, Kevin saw how hopeless his enemy looked. Enemies or not, Eddy needed help. "Hey, bro guy!" Kevin shouted, causing the man to turn and glare at him. "Lay off him, man!" "Yeah, Mr. Macho Man!" Nazz called out. The kids all ganged up with one another. Although none of them didn't like Eddy, this wasn't right. Ed stood alone against the house. He was powerless. He eyed the door that was being stretched out by Eddy's arms. An idea lit up in his eyes. All these years of Ed and Eddy doing things for him, it was time to pay the favor back. He removed one of the latches that held the door together. The door went flying back like a slingshot. The second Eddy's brother turned around, he took the door right in his face. Eddy was finally released, but was forced to bounce along the ground as he held onto the door. He slammed to the ground, having taken such a hard hit in the head. The kids winced when they saw the whole scene unfold in front of them. Eddy's brother wobbled around until he fell to the ground. He was in such a daze that he let the phrase uncle escape his mouth. The two friends ran and bent down to their friend's side after Ed pulled his friend out of the ground. Eddy was alive, only staring miserably at the sky. "Eddy, speak to me!" Ed shouted. "Are you all right?" Eddy was too busy reflecting on the memory to answer. "You're leaving?" Eddy remembered asking when he was 5. "Yep, Mom and Dad wanted me to go out and see the world." "What about me? Who's going to teach me to be the best scam combiner? Like you?" "Don't get your hopes up, Pipsqueak. You're never going to be like me. You're a loser, and that's what you'll always be." Eddy broke inside, but then his brother bent down to him. "Here, take this jar. If you fill it to the top by the time I get back, maybe I'll change my mind. Remember, the only way to get it right is to get it wrong." He hasn't changed. Eddy never meant a thing to his brother. He'd been faking his way through life for nothing. What was he going to tell his friends? He couldn't lie anymore. That's what he'd been doing this whole life. Eddy removed Ed's hand from his shoulders. "I made it all up, Double D. Everything about my brother was a lie." His friends looked at him in horror. "I just made things up so people would like me, think I was cool. But boy, I was wrong. The scam, my brother, this." Tears fell from his eyes, not just from the lie he made about his life, but because of his friends. He barely acknowledged them as his friends. They stayed by his side all these years, even when forced to do things they didn't want to be part of. He was surprised how they never left, but now they had a good reason too. "When am I going to learn, Double D?" Eddy covered his eyes, not wanting anyone to see him cry. His parents kept him apart from his brother for a reason. They didn't want him to figure out that he never meant anything to him. That's what Eddy was. He was desperate for attention, going as far as making himself look like an idiot. He was so stupid. What a waste of a life. Eddy's hands were gently taken away by Ed. "I think you just have, Eddy," he said to him with a kind smile. He did? Oh, that's what he was trying to learn. He learned that he hadn't been learning anything through the false advice and lessons from his brother. Eddy smiled through the tears. He learned that his friends were really his friends. True friends would never abandon one another during their time of need. You guys are the best. You're both more brothers to me than he ever was." The Eds all stared happily at one another. They felt closer than they ever did before. They didn't have to worry about anymore because they could continue. The kids threw Eddy into the air, cheering for him. Ed and Eddy were dumbfounded. What happened to the attack? Ed slipped and fell on his rear end. Before he could get up, Sarah gathered her brother into a big hug. When she looked into that horrible man's eyes, she saw what she may become when she got older. There was no need to treat Ed the way she did. not when he put our needs before his. It was time for a change.
"Let Rolf rub the pit of victory, Ed boy!"
Rolf exclaimed, rubbing a confused Eddy.
"I'm so glad you're okay, dude."
Nazz wrapped Eddy in a hug and surprised the boy with a big kiss.
"You're awesome!"
I am? I gotta admit, pal, that was such a choice, Kevin said, patting Eddy on the back.
"It was?"
Eddy burst with joy. The kids stood around, congratulating the Edds while the Cankers circled around Eddy's brother.
"Saw deadbeat this guy turned out to be,"
Lee said, seeing how weak he was, all because of a door.
"He doesn't look so tough,"
Marie said. Each Canker grabbed a limb and dragged the man into the house. They were going to make this revenge a fun experience. The kids' happiness came to a halt when a city bus came screeching to a stop, only a few feet away from them.
"Your time of reckoning ends now, rapscallions!"
Johnny rushed out from the bus and charged toward the Edds.
"It's melon time! Where did he come from?"
Eddy screamed.
"Johnny, wait!"
Johnny scooped each Edd and threw them into a pile. He jumped on them and perched himself on the top.
"No thanks are necessary, citizens."
"You idiot!" That wasn't the reaction he was expecting. Sarah pummeled him to the ground.
"Leave our friends alone! Back off, melon dweeb! Leave some produce for Rolf!"
All the kids joined in on the beating of Johnny while the Edds lay bewildered on the ground. Were they really defending them all because he hurt the Edds? Kevin appeared from behind the dust cloud. Sorry about that. Say, let's go to my place. Jawbreakers are on me. The Edds almost fainted from excitement. Was this really happening? They were finally accepting them as friends of their own. Ed wrapped his arms around Ed. Ed returned the hug. He'd been avoiding Ed's hugs for years, and it was time he changed his ways. The kids lifted the Edds into the air.
"We did it, Double D!"
Eddy rejoiced.
"Everyone loves us! We're finally in, baby!"
And it only took 130 episodes, 4 specials, and a movie, Eddy, Ed pointed out.
"Let's sing a song!"
Ed yelled out. The kids ran out singing from the amusement park. Ed looked over to see Eddy actually singing. Maybe finding his brother was a good thing. If they didn't, he would have learned what he'd been trying to learn for the past 8 years. Everything still wasn't completely back to normal, but Eddy knew that when they were exiting the park, he was welcoming into his new life.
"This is your craziest plan ever, Plank. We'll show them. We'll show them all."
What's that?
"They did, didn't they?"
Yes.
"The goody-goody two-shoe days of Captain Melonhead and Splinter have come to an end. And out of the darkness will rise the villainous days of the Gourd and his evil cohort, Camper, the Dark Shard. Together, we will extract revenge on the entire cul-de-sac."
What? There's no time left?
It's the end of the story?
What story?